Day 8. The Introduction. Endeth here the 7th day of the Decameron, beginneth the 8th, in which, under the rule of Lauretta, discourse is had of those tricks that daily woman plays man, or man woman, or one man another. The summits of the loftiest mountains were already illumined by the rays of the rising sun, the shades of night were fled, and all things plainly visible, when the Queen and her company arose, and hied them first to the dewy mead, where for a while they walked; then, about half tierce, they wended their way to a little church that was hard by, where they heard divine service; after which they returned to the palace, and having breakfasted with gay and gladsome cheer, and sung and danced a while, were dismissed by the Queen, to rest them as to each might seem good. But when the sun was past the meridian, the Queen mustered them again for their wonted pastime, and, all being seated by the fair fountain, thus at her command Neifile began. End of Introduction of the Day 8.
Day 8. The First Story. Gulfardo borrows moneys of Guasparuolo, which he has agreed to give Guasparuolo's wife, that he may lie with her. He gives them to her, and in her presence tells Guasparuolo that he has done so, and she acknowledges that 'tis true. Sith God has ordained that 'tis for me to take the lead to-day with my story, well pleased am I. And for that, loving ladies, much has been said touching the tricks that women play men, I am minded to tell you of one that a man played a woman, not because I would censure what the man did, or say that 'twas not merited by the woman, but rather to commend the man and censure the woman, and to show that men may beguile those that think to beguile them, as well as be beguiled by those they think to beguile. For peradventure what I am about to relate should, in strictness of speech, not be termed beguilement, but rather retaliation. For as it behoves woman to be most strictly virtuous, and to guard her chastity as her very life, nor on any account to allow herself to sully it, which notwithstanding 'tis not possible by reason of our frailty that there should be as perfect an observance of this law as were meet, I affirm that she that allows herself to infringe it for money merits the fire, whereas she that so offends under the prepotent stress of love will receive pardon from any judge that knows how to temper justice with mercy. Witness what but the other day we heard from Philostrato touching Madonna Philippa at Prato. Know then that there was once at Milan a German mercenary, Gulfardo by name, a doughty man, and very loyal to those with whom he took service, a quality most uncommon in Germans. And as he was wont to be most faithful in repaying whatever moneys he borrowed, he would have no difficulty in finding a merchant to advance him any amount of money at a low rate of interest. Now, tarrying thus at Milan, Gulfardo fixed his affection on a very fine woman, named Madonna Ambrosia, the wife of a wealthy merchant, one Guasparuolo Cagastraccio, with whom he was well acquainted and on friendly terms; which amour he managed with such discretion that neither the husband nor any one else wist aught of it. So one day he sent her a message, beseeching her of her courtesy to gratify his passion, and assuring her that he on his part was ready to obey her every behest. The lady made a great many words about the affair, the upshot of which was that she would do as Gulfardo desired upon the following terms, to wit, that in the first place he should never discover the matter to a soul, and secondly, that as for some purpose or another she required 200 florins of gold, he, out of his abundance, should supply her necessity. These conditions being satisfied, she would be ever at his service. Offended by such base sordidness in one whom he had supposed to be an honourable woman, Gulfardo passed from ardent love to something very like hatred, and cast about how he might flout her. So he sent her word that he would right gladly pleasure her in this and in any other matter that might be in his power. Let her but say when he was come to see her, and he would bring the moneys with him, and none should know of the matter except a comrade of his, in whom he placed much trust, and who was privy to all that he did. The lady, if she should not rather be called the punk, gleefully made answer that in the course of a few days her husband, Guasparuolo, was to go to Genoa on business, and that when he was gone she would let Gulfardo know, and appoint a time for him to visit her. Gulfardo thereupon chose a convenient time, and hied him to Guasparuolo, to whom, "I am come," quoth he, "about a little matter of business which I have on hand, for which I require 200 florins of gold, and I should be glad if thou wouldst lend them me at the rate of interest which thou art wont to charge me." "That gladly will I," replied Guasparuolo, and told out the money at once. A few days later, Guasparuolo being gone to Genoa, as the lady had said, she sent word to Gulfardo that he should bring her the 200 florins of gold. So Gulfardo hied him with his comrade to the lady's house, where he found her expecting him, and lost no time in handing her the 200 florins of gold in his comrade's presence, saying, "You will keep the money, madam, and give it to your husband when he returns." Witting not why Gulfardo so said, but thinking that 'twas but to conceal from his comrade that it was given by way of price, the lady made answer, "That will I gladly, but I must first see that the amount is right." Whereupon she told the florins out upon a table, and when she found that the 200 were there, she put them away in high glee, and turning to Gulfardo, took him into her chamber, where, not on that night only, but on many another night, while her husband was away, he had of her all that he craved. On Guasparuolo's return, Gulfardo presently paid him a visit, having first made sure that the lady would be with him, and so in her presence, "Guasparuolo," quoth he, "I had after all no occasion for the money, to wit the 200 florins of gold that thou didst lend me the other day, being unable to carry through the transaction for which I borrowed them, and so I took an early opportunity of bringing them to thy wife, and gave them to her. Thou wilt therefore cancel the account." Whereupon Guasparuolo turned to the lady, and asked her if she had them. She, not daring to deny the fact in presence of the witness, answered, "Why, yes, I had them, and quite forgot to tell thee." "Good," quoth then Guasparuolo, "we are quits, Gulfardo. Make thy mind easy. I will see that thy account is set right." Gulfardo then withdrew, leaving the flouted lady to hand over her ill-gotten gains to her husband, and so the astute lover had his pleasure of his greedy mistress for nothing. End of Day 8, the First Story.
Day 8, the Second Story. The priest of Varlungo lies with Monna Belcolore. He leaves with her his cloak by way of pledge, and receives from her a mortar. He returns the mortar, and demands of her the cloak that he had left in pledge, which the good lady returns him with a gibe.
Ladies and men alike commended Gualfardo for the check that he gave to the greed of the Milanese lady, but before they had done, the queen turned to Pamphilo, and with a smile bade him follow suit, wherefore thus Pamphilo began.
Fair my ladies, it occurs to me to tell you a short story, which reflects no credit on those by whom we are continually wronged without being able to retaliate, to wit, the priests, who have instituted a crusade against our wives, and deem that, when they have made conquest of one of them, they have done a work every whit as worthy of recompense by remission of sin and punishment as if they had brought the Soldan in chains to Avignon. In which respect 'tis not possible for the hapless laity to be even with them, howbeit they are as hot to make reprisals on the priests' mothers, sisters, mistresses, and daughters, as the priests to attack their wives. Wherefore I am minded to give you, as I may do in few words, the history of a rustic amour, the conclusion whereof was not a little laughable, nor barren of moral, for you may also gather therefrom that 'tis not always well to believe everything that a priest says. I say then that at Varlungo, a village hard by here, as all of you, my ladies, should wot either of your own knowledge or by report, there dwelt a worthy priest, and doughty of body in the service of the ladies, who, albeit he was none too quick at his book, had no lack of precious and blessed solecisms to edify his flock withal of a Sunday under the elm. And when the men were out of doors, he would visit their wives as never a priest had done before him, bringing them feast-day gowns and holy water, and now again a bit of candle, and giving them his blessing. Now it so befell that among those of his fair parishioners whom he most affected, the first place was at length taken by one Monna Belcolore, the wife of a husbandman that called himself Bentivegna del Mazzo. And in good sooth she was a winsome and lusty country lass, brown as a berry and buxom enough, and fitter than e'er another for his mill. Moreover, she had not her match in playing the tabret and singing. The borage is full sappy, and in leading a brawl or a breakdown, no matter whom might be next her, with a fair and dainty kerchief in her hand. Which spells so wrought upon Master Priest, that for love of her he grew distracted, and did not all day long but loiter about the village on the chance of catching sight of her. And if of a Sunday morning he espied her in church, he strove might and main to acquit himself of his Kyrie and Sanctus in the style of a great singer, albeit his performance was liker to the braying of an ass. Whereas, if he saw her not, he scarce exerted himself at all. However, he managed with such discretion that neither Bentivegna del Mazzo nor any of the neighbours wist aught of his love. And hoping thereby to ingratiate himself with Monna Belcolore, he from time to time would send her presents, now a clove of fresh garlic, the best in all the countryside, from his own garden, which he tilled with his own hands, and anon a basket of beans or a bunch of chives or shallots. And when he thought it might serve his turn, he would give her a sly glance, and follow it up with a little amorous mocking and mowing, which she, with rustic awkwardness, feigned not to understand, and ever maintained her reserve, so that Master Priest made no headway. Now it so befell that one day, when the priest at high noon was aimlessly gadding about the village, he encountered Bentivegna del Mazzo at the tail of a well-laden ass, and greeted him, asking him whither he was going. "I' faith, sir," quoth Bentivegna, "for sure 'tis to town I go, having an affair or two to attend to there, and I'm taking these things to Ser Buonacuore de Ginestretto, to get him to stand by me in I wot not what matter, whereof the justice of the quorum has by his provoker served me with a pertrumpery summons to appear before him." Whereupon, "'Tis well, my son," quoth the priest, overjoyed, "my blessing go with thee. Good luck to thee, and a speedy return. And hark ye, shouldst thou see Lapuccio or Naldino, do not forget to tell them to send me those thongs for my flails." "It shall be done," quoth Bentivegna, and jogged on towards Florence, while the priest, thinking that now was his time to hie him to Belcolore and try his fortune, put his best leg forward, and stayed not till he was at the house, which entering, he said, "God be gracious to us! Who is within?" Belcolore, who was up in the loft, made answer, "Welcome, sir, but what dost thou, gadding about in the heat?" "Why, as I hope for God's blessing," quoth he, "I am just come to stay with thee for a while, having met thy husband on his way to town." Whereupon down came Belcolore, took a seat, and began sifting cabbage seed that her husband had lately threshed. By and by the priest began, "So, Belcolore, wilt thou keep me ever a-dying thus?" Whereat Belcolore tittered, and said, "Why, what did I do to you?" "Truly, nothing at all," replied the priest, "but thou sufferest me not to do to thee that which I had lief, and which God commands." "Now away with you," returned Belcolore. "Do priests do that sort of thing?" "Indeed we do," quoth the priest, "and to better purpose than others. Why not? I tell you our grinding is far better, and wouldst thou know why? 'Tis because 'tis intermittent. And in truth 'twill be well worth thy while to keep thine own counsel, and let me do it." "Worth my while!" ejaculated Belcolore. "How may that be? There is never a one of you but would overreach the very devil." "'Tis not for me to say," returned the priest. "Say but what thou wouldst have. Shall it be a pair of dainty shoes, or wouldst thou prefer a fillet, or perchance a gay riband? What's thy will?" "Marry, no lack have I," quoth Belcolore, "of such things as these. But if you wish me so well, why do me not a service, and I would then be at your command." "Name but the service," returned the priest, "and gladly will I do it." Quoth then Belcolore, "On Saturday I have to go to Florence to deliver some wool that I have spun, and to get my spinning wheel put in order. Lend me but £5, I know you have them, and I will redeem my purse petticoat from the pawnshop, and also the girdle that I wear on saints' days, and that I had when I was married. You see that without them I cannot go to church or anywhere else, and then I will do just as you wish thenceforth and forever." Whereupon, "So God give me a good year," quoth he, "as I have not the money with me, but never fear that I will see that thou hast it before Saturday with all the pleasure in life." "Ay, ay," rejoined Belcolore, "you all make great promises, but then you never keep them. Think you to serve me as you served Biliuzza, whom you left in the lurch at last? God's faith, you do not so. To think that she turned woman of the world just for that! If you have not the money with you, why, go and get it." "Prithee," returned the priest, "send me not home just now, for seest thou 'tis the very nick of time with me, and the coast is clear, and perchance it might not be so on my return, and in short I know not when it would be likely to go so well as now." Whereto she did but rejoin, "Good, if you are minded to go, get you gone. If not, stay where you are." The priest, therefore, seeing that she was not disposed to give him what he wanted, as he was fain, to wit, on his own terms, but was bent on having a quid pro quo, changed his tone, and, "Lo now," quoth he, "thou doubtest I will not bring thee the money, so, to set thy mind at rest, I will leave thee this cloak. Thou seest 'tis good sky-blue silk, in pledge." So, raising her head and glancing at the cloak, "And what may the cloak be worth?" quoth Belcolore. "Worth!" ejaculated the priest. "I would have thee know that 'tis all do I, not to say true I, make. Nay, there are some of our folk here that say 'tis quadru I, and 'tis not a fortnight since I bought it of Lotto, the second-hand dealer, for 7 good pounds, and then had it 5 good sold I under value, by what I hear from Buglietto, who, thou knowest, is an excellent judge of these articles." "Oh, say you so?" exclaimed Belcolore. "So help me God, I should not have thought it. However, let me look at it." So Master Priest, being ready for action, doffed the cloak and handed it to her. And she, having put it in a safe place, said to him, "Now, sir, we will away to the hut. There is never a soul goes there." And so they did. And there Master Priest, giving her many a mighty buss, and straining her to his sacred person, solaced himself with her no little while. Which done, he hied him away in his cassock, as if he were come from officiating at a wedding. But when he was back in his holy quarters, he bethought him that not all the candles that he received by way of offering in the course of an entire year would amount to half of 5 pounds, and saw that he had made a bad bargain, and repented him that he had left the cloak in pledge, and cast about how he might recover it without paying anything. And as he did not lack cunning, he hit upon an excellent expedient, by which he compassed his end. So, on the morrow, being a saint's day, he sent a neighbour's lad to Monna Belcolore, with a request that she would be so good as to lend him her stone mortar, for that Binguccio del Poggio and Nuto Buglietti were to breakfast with him that morning, and he therefore wished to make a sauce. Belcolore having sent the mortar, the priest, about breakfast time, reckoning that Bentivegna del Mazzo and Belcolore would be at their meal, called his clerk and said to him, "Take the mortar back to Belcolore, and say, 'My master thanks you very kindly, and bids you return the cloak that the lad left with you in pledge.'" The clerk took the mortar to Belcolore's house, where, finding her at table with Bentivegna, he set the mortar down and delivered the priest's message. Whereto Belcolore would fain have demurred, but Bentivegna gave her a threatening glance, saying, "So then, thou takest a pledge from master priest? By Christ, I vow, I have half a mind to give thee a great clout of the chin. Go, give it back at once, or murrain on thee. And look to it that whatever he may have a mind to, were it our very ass, he be never denied." So, with a very bad grace, Belcolore got up, and went to the wardrobe, and took out the cloak, and gave it to the clerk, saying, "Tell thy master from me, would to God he may never ply pestle in my mortar again, such honour has he done me for this turn." So the clerk returned with the cloak, and delivered the message to master priest, who, laughing, made answer, "Tell her, when thou next seest her, that, so she lend us not the mortar, I will not lend her the pestle, be it tit for tat." Bentivegna made no account of his wife's words, deeming that 'twas but his chiding that had provoked them. But Belcolore was not a little displeased with master priest, and had never a word to say to him till the vintage. After which, what with the salutary fear in which she stood of the mouth of Lucifer the Great, to which he threatened to consign her, and the must and roast chestnuts that he sent her, she made it up with him, and many a jolly time they had together. And though she got not the 5 pounds from him, he put a new skin on her tabret, and fitted it with a little bell, wherewith she was satisfied. End of Day 8, the second story.
Day 8, the third story. Calandrino, Bruno, and Buffalmacco go in quest of the heliotrope beside the Mugnone. Thinking to have found it, Calandrino gets him home laden with stones. His wife chides him, whereat he waxes wroth, beats her, and tells his comrades what they know better than he.
Ended Pamphilos's story, which moved the ladies to inextinguishable laughter. The queen bade Elisa follow suit, whereupon, laughing, she thus began.
I know not, debonair my ladies, whether with my little story, which is no less true than entertaining, I shall give you occasion to laugh as much as Pamphilo has done with his, but I will do my best. In our city, where there has never been lack of odd humours and queer folk, there dwelt, not long time ago, a painter named Calandrino, a simple soul of uncouth manners, that spent most of his time with 2 other painters, the one Bruno, the other Buffalmacco by name, pleasant fellows enough, but not without their full share of sound and shrewd sense, and who kept with Calandrino for that they not seldom found his singular ways and his simplicity very diverting. There was also at the same time at Florence one Maso del Saggio, a fellow marvellously entertaining by his cleverness, dexterity, and unfailing resource, who, having heard somewhat touching Calandrino's simplicity, resolved to make fun of him by playing him a trick, and inducing him to believe some prodigy. And happening one day to come upon Calandrino in the church of San Giovanni, where he sat intently regarding the paintings and intaglios of the tabernacle above the altar, which had then but lately been set there, he deemed time and place convenient for the execution of his design, which he accordingly imparted to one of his comrades, whereupon the two men drew nigh the place where Calandrino sat alone, and feigning not to see him fell a talking of the virtues of divers stones, of which Maso spoke as aptly and pertinently as if he had been a great and learned lapidary. Calandrino heard what passed between them, and witting that 'twas no secret, after a while got up and joined them, to Maso's no small delight. He therefore continued his discourse, and being asked by Calandrino where these stones of such rare virtues were to be found, made answer: "Chiefly in Berlinzone, in the land of the Basques. The district is called Bengodi, and there they bind the vines with sausages, and a denier will buy a goose and a gosling into the bargain. And on a mountain, all of grated Parmesan cheese, dwell folk that do naught else but make macaroni and ravioli, and boil them in capons broth, and then throw them down to be scrambled for. And hard by flows a rivulet of vernaccia, the best that ever was drunk, and never a drop of water therein." "Ah, 'tis a sweet country," quoth Calandrino. "But tell me, what becomes of the capons that they boil?" "They are all eaten by the Basques," replied Maso. "Then wast thou ever there?" quoth Calandrino. Whereupon, "Was I ever there, sayest thou?" replied Maso. "Why, if I have been there once, I have been there 1,000 times." "And how many miles is it from here?" quoth Calandrino. "Oh," returned Maso, "more than thou couldst number in a night without slumber." "Farther off than the Abruzzi?" said Calandrino. "Why, yes, 'tis a bit farther," replied Maso. Now Calandrino, like the simple soul that he was, marking the composed and grave countenance with which Maso spoke, could not have believed him more thoroughly if he had uttered the most patent truth, and thus taking his words for gospel. "'Tis a trifle too far for my purse," quoth he. "Were it nigher, I warrant thee I would go with thee thither one while, just to see the macaroni come tumbling down, and take my fill thereof. But tell me, so good luck befall thee, are none of these stones that have these rare virtues to be found in these regions?" "Eh," replied Maso, "two sorts of stone are found there, both of virtues extraordinary. The one sort are the sandstones of Settignano and Montisci, which being made into millstones, by virtue thereof flour is made. Wherefore 'tis a common saying in those countries that blessings come from God and millstones from Montisci. But for that these sandstones are in great plenty, they are held cheap by us, just as by them are emeralds, whereof they have mountains bigger than Monte Morello, that shine at midnight, a God's name. And know this, that whoso should make a goodly pair of millstones, and connect them with a ring before ever a hole was drilled in them, then take them to the Soldan, should get all he would have thereby. The other sort of stone is the heliotrope, as we lapidaries call it, a stone of very great virtue, inasmuch as whoso carries it on his person is seen, so long as he keep it, by never another soul where he is not." "These be virtues great indeed," quoth Calandrino, "but where is the second stone to be found?" Whereto Maso made answer that there were usually some to be found in Mugnone. "And what are its size and color?" quoth Calandrino. "The size varies," replied Maso, "for some are bigger and some smaller than others, but all are of the same color, being nearly black." All these matters duly marked and fixed in his memory, Calandrino made as if he had other things to attend to, and took his leave of Maso with the intention of going in quest of the stone, but not until he had let his especial friends Bruno and Buffalmacco know of his project. So that no time might be lost, but, postponing everything else, they might begin the quest at once, he set about looking for them, and spent the whole morning in the search. At length, when 'twas already past none, he called to mind that they would be at work in the Fantine women's convent, and though 'twas excessively hot, he let nothing stand in his way, but at a pace that was more like a run than a walk, hied him thither, and so soon as he had made them ware of his presence, thus he spoke: "Comrades, so you are but minded to hearken to me, 'tis in our power to become the richest men in Florence, for I am informed by one that may be trusted, that there is a kind of stone in the Mugnone which renders whoso carries it invisible to every other soul in the world. Wherefore, methinks we were wise to let none have the start of us, but go search for the stone without any delay. We shall find it without a doubt, for I know what 'tis like, and when we have found it, we have but to put it in the purse and get us to the money changers, whose counters, as you know, are always laden with groats and florins, and help ourselves to as many as we have a mind to. No one will see us, and so, hey presto, we shall be rich folk in the twinkling of an eye, and have no more need to go besmearing the walls all day long like so many snails." Whereat Bruno and Buffalmacco began only to laugh, and exchanging glances, made as if they marvelled exceedingly, and expressed approval of Calandrino's project. Then Buffalmacco asked what might be the name of the stone. Calandrino, like the numbskull that he was, had already forgotten the name, so he made answer: "Why need we concern ourselves with the name, since we know the stone's virtue? Methinks we were best to go look for it, and waste no more time." "Well, well," said Bruno, "but what are the size and shape of the stone?" "They are of all sizes and shapes," said Calandrino, "but they are all pretty nearly black, wherefore methinks we were best to collect all the black stones that we see until we hit upon it, and so let us be off, and lose no more time." "Nay, but," said Bruno, "wait a bit," and turning to Buffalmacco, "Methinks," quoth he, "that Calandrino says well, but I doubt this is not the time for such work, seeing that the sun is high, and his rays so flood the Mugnone as to dry all the stones, insomuch that stones will now show as white that in the morning, before the sun had dried them, would show as black. Besides which, today being a working day, there will be for one cause or another folk not a few about the Mugnone, who, seeing us, might guess what we were come for, and peradventure do the like themselves, whereby it might well be that they found the stone, and we might miss the trot by trying after the amble. Wherefore, so you agree, methinks we were best to go about it in the morning, when we shall be better able to distinguish the black stones from the white, and on a holiday, when there will be none to see us." Buffalmacco's advice being approved by Bruno, Calandrino chimed in, and so 'twas arranged that they should all three go in quest of the stone on the following Sunday. So Calandrino, having besought his companions above all things to let never a soul in the world hear aught of the matter, for that it had been imparted to him in strict confidence, and having told them what he had heard touching the land of Bengodi, the truth of which he affirmed with oaths, took leave of them, and they concerted their plan, while Calandrino impatiently expected the Sunday morning. Whereon about dawn he arose and called them, and forth they issued by the Porta a San Gallo, and hied them to the Mugnone, and following its course began their quest of the stone. Calandrino, as was natural, leading the way, and jumping lightly from rock to rock, and wherever he espied a black stone, stooping down, picking it up, and putting it in the fold of his tunic, while his comrades followed, picking up a stone here and a stone there. Thus it was that Calandrino had not gone far before, finding that there was no more room in his tunic, he lifted the skirts of his gown, which was not cut after the fashion of Hainaut, and gathering them under his leathern girdle, and making them fast on every side, thus furnished himself with a fresh and capacious lap, which, however, taking no time to fill, he made another lap out of his cloak, which in like manner he soon filled with stones. Wherefore Bruno and Buffalmacco, seeing that Calandrino was well laden, and that 'twas nigh upon breakfast time, and the moment for action come. "Where is Calandrino?" quoth Bruno to Buffalmacco. Whereto Buffalmacco, who had Calandrino full in view, having first turned about and looked here, there, and everywhere, made answer, "That wot not I, but not so long ago he was just in front of us." "Not so long ago, forsooth," returned Bruno. "'Tis my firm belief that at this very moment he is at breakfast at home, having left to us his wild goose chase of black stones in the Mugnone." "Marry," quoth Buffalmacco, "he did but serve us right so to trick us and leave, seeing that we were so silly as to believe him. Why, who could have thought that any but we would have been so foolish as to believe that a stone of such rare virtue was to be found in the Mugnone?" Calandrino, hearing their colloquy, forthwith imagined that he had the stone in his hand, and by its virtue, though present, was invisible to them, and overjoyed by such good fortune, would not say a word to undeceive them, but determined to hie him home, and accordingly faced about and put himself in motion. Whereupon, "Eh," quoth Buffalmacco to Bruno, "what are we about that we go not back to?" "Go we then," said Bruno, "but by God I swear that Calandrino shall never play me another such trick, and as to this, where I nigh him, as I have been all the morning, I would teach him to remember it for a month or so, such a reminder would I give him in the heel with this stone." And even as he spoke he threw back his arm and launched the stone against Calandrino's heel. Galled by the blow, Calandrino gave a great hop and a slight gasp, but said nothing, and halted not. Then picking out one of the stones that he had collected, "Bruno," quoth Buffalmacco, "see what a goodly stone I have here, would it might but catch Calandrino in the back." And forthwith he discharged it with main force upon the said back, and in short, suiting action to word, now in this way, now in that, they stoned him all the way up the Mugnone, as far as the Porta a San Gallo. There they threw away the stones they had picked up, and tarried a while with the customs officers, who, being primed by them, had let Calandrino pass unchallenged, while their laughter knew no bounds. So Calandrino, halting nowhere, betook him to his house, which was hard by the corner of the Messina. And so well did fortune prosper the trick, that all the way by the stream and across the city there was never a soul that said a word to Calandrino, and indeed he encountered but few, for most folk were at breakfast. But no sooner was Calandrino thus gotten home with his stones, than it so happened that his good lady Monna Tessa showed her fair face at the stairs head, and catching sight of him, and being somewhat annoyed by his long delay, chid him, saying, "What the devil brings thee here so late? Must breakfast wait thee until all other folk have had it?" Calandrino caught the words, and angered and mortified to find that he was not invisible, broke out with, "Alas! cursed woman, so 'twas thou! Thou hast undone me, but God's faith I will pay thee out." Whereupon he was upstairs in a trice, and having discharged his great load of stones in a parlour, rushed with fell intent upon his wife, and laid hold of her by the hair, and threw her down at his feet, and beat and kicked her in every part of her person with all the force he had in his arms and legs, insomuch that he left never a hair of her head or bone of her body unscathed, and 'twas all in vain that she laid her palms together, and crossed her fingers, and cried for mercy. Now Buffalmacco and Bruno, after making merry a while with the warders of the gate, had set off again at a leisurely pace, keeping some distance behind Calandrino. Arrived at his door, they heard the noise of the sound thrashing that he was giving his wife, and making as if they were but that very instant come upon the scene, they called him. Calandrino, flushed all of a sweat and out of breath, showed himself at the window and bade them come up. They, putting on a somewhat angry air, did so, and espied Calandrino sitting in the parlour amid the stones which lay all about, untrussed, and puffing with the air of a man spent with exertion, while his lady lay in one of the corners, weeping bitterly, her hair all dishevelled, her clothes torn to shreds, and her face livid, bruised, and battered. So after surveying the room a while, "What means this, Calandrino?" quoth they. "Art thou minded to build thee a wall, that we see so many stones about?" And then, as they received no answer, they continued, "And how's this? How comes Monna Tessa in this plight? 'Twould seem thou hast given her a beating. What unheard of doings are these?" What with the weight of the stones that he had carried, and the fury with which he had beaten his wife, and the mortification that he felt at the miscarriage of his enterprise, Calandrino was too spent to utter a word by way of reply. Wherefore, in a menacing tone, Buffalmacco began again. "However out of sorts thou mayst have been, Calandrino, thou shouldst not have played us so scurvy a trick as thou hast. To take us with thee to the Mugnone in quest of this stone of rare virtue, and then, without so much as saying either good speed or devil speed, to be off, and leave us there like a couple of gawks. We take it not a little unkindly, and rest assured that thou shalt never so fool us again." Whereto, with an effort, Calandrino replied, "Comrades, be not wroth with me. 'Tis not as you think. I, luckless wight, found the stone. Listen, and you will no longer doubt that I say sooth. When you began saying one to another, 'Where is Calandrino?' I was within 10 paces of you, and marking that you came by without seeing me, I went before, and so, keeping ever a little ahead of you, I came hither." And then he told them the whole story of what they had said and done from beginning to end, and showed them his back and heel, how they had been mauled by the stones. After which, "And I tell you," he went on, "that laden though I was with all these stones that you see here, never a word was said to me by the warders of the gate as I passed in, though you know how vexatious and grievous these warders are wont to make themselves in their determination to see everything. And moreover, I met by the way several of my gossips and friends that are ever wont to greet me, and ask me to drink, and never a word said any or them to me, no, nor half a word either, but they passed me by as men that saw me not. But at last, being come home, I was met and seen by this devil of a woman, curses upon her, forasmuch as all things, as you know, lose their virtue in the presence of a woman. Whereby I, from being the most lucky, am become the most luckless man in Florence, and therefore I thrashed her as long as I could stir a hand, nor now I wherefore I forbear to slice her veins for her. Cursed be the hour that first I saw her, cursed be the hour that I brought her into the house." And so, kindling with fresh wrath, he was about to start up and give her another thrashing, when Buffalmacco and Bruno, who had listened to his story with an air of great surprise, and affirmed its truth again and again, while they all but burst with suppressed laughter, seeing him now frantic to renew his assault upon his wife, got up and withstood and held him back, averring that the lady was in no wise to blame for what had happened, but only he, who, witting that things lost their virtue in the presence of women, had not bidden her keep aloof from him that day, which precaution God had not suffered him to take, either because the luck was not to be his, or because he was minded to cheat his comrades, to whom he should have shown the stone as soon as he found it. And so, with many words they hardly prevailed upon him to forgive his injured wife, and leaving him to rue the ill luck that had filled his house with stones, went their way. End of Day 8, the Third Story.
Day 8. The Fourth Story. The rector of Fiesole loves a widow lady, by whom he is not loved, and thinking to lie with her, lies with her maid, with whom the lady's brothers cause him to be found by his bishop.
Elisa being come to the end of her story, which in the telling had yielded no small delight to all the company, the queen, turning to Emilia, signified her will that her story should ensue at once upon that of Elisa. And thus with alacrity Emilia began.
Noble ladies, how we are teased and tormented by these priests and friars, and indeed by clergy of all sorts, I mind me to have been set forth in more than one of the stories that have been told, but as 'twere not possible to say so much thereof, but that more would yet remain to say, I propose to supplement them with the story of a rector, who, in defiance of all the world, was bent upon having the favour of a gentlewoman, whether she would or no, which gentlewoman, being discreet above a little, treated him as he deserved. Fiesole, whose hill is here within sight, is, as each of you knows, a city of immense antiquity, and was aforetime great, though now it is fallen into complete decay, which notwithstanding it always was and still is the see of a bishop. Now there was once a gentlewoman, Monna Picarda by name, a widow, that had an estate at Fiesole, hard by the cathedral, on which, for that she was not in the easiest circumstances, she lived most part of the year, and with her 2 brothers, very worthy and courteous young men, both of them. And the lady being wont frequently to resort to the cathedral, and being still quite young and fair and debonair withal, it so befell that the rector grew in the last degree enamoured of her, and waxed at length so bold that he himself avowed his passion to the lady, praying her to entertain his love, and requite it in like measure. The rector was advanced in years, but otherwise the veriest springald, being bold and of a high spirit, of a boundless conceit of himself, and of a mien and manners most affected and in the worst taste, and withal so tiresome and insufferable that he was on bad terms with everybody, and, if with one person more than another, with this lady, who not only cared not a jot for him, but had liefer have had a headache than his company. Wherefore the lady discreetly made answer, I may well prize your love, sir, and love you I should and will right gladly, but such love as yours and mine may never admit of aught that is not honourable. You are my spiritual father and a priest, and now verging towards old age, circumstances which should ensure your honour and chastity, and I, on my part, am no longer a girl, such as these love affairs might beseem, but a widow, and well you wot how it behoves widows to be chaste. Wherefore I pray you to have me excused, for, after the sort you crave, you shall never have my love, nor would I in such sort be loved by you. With this answer the rector was for the nonce fain to be content, but he was not the man to be dismayed and routed by a first repulse, and with his wonted temerity and effrontery he plied her again and again with letters and embassages, and also by word of mouth, when he espied her entering the church. Wherefore the lady, finding this persecution more grievous and harassing than she could well bear, cast about how she might be quit thereof in such fashion as he deserved, seeing that he left her no choice. Howbeit she would do naught in the matter until she had conferred with her brothers. She therefore told them how the rector pursued her, and how she meant to foil him, and with their full concurrence some few days afterwards she went, as she was wont, to church. The rector no sooner saw her than he approached and accosted her as he was wont, in a tone of easy familiarity. The lady greeted him as he came up with a glance of gladsome recognition, and when he had treated her to not a little of his wonted eloquence, she drew him aside, and heaving a great sigh, said, "I have oftentimes heard it said, sir, that there is no castle so strong, but that, if the siege be continued day by day, it will sooner or later be taken; which I now plainly perceive is my own case. For so fairly have you hemmed me in with this, that, and the other pretty speech or the like blandishments, that you have constrained me to make naught of my former resolve, and, seeing that I find such favour with you, to surrender myself unto you." Whereto, overjoyed, the rector made answer, "Madam, I am greatly honoured, and, sooth to say, I marvel not a little how you should hold out so long, seeing that I have never had the like experience with any other woman, insomuch that I have at times said, were women of silver they would not be worth a denier, for there is none but would give under the hammer. But no more of this. When and where may we come together?" "Sweet my lord," replied the lady, "for the when, 'tis just as we may think best, for I have no husband to whom to render account of my nights, but the where passes my wit to conjecture." "How so?" quoth the rector. "Why not in your own house?" "Sir," replied the lady, "you know that I have 2 brothers, both young men, who day and night bring their comrades into the house, which is none too large; for which reason it might not be done there, unless we were minded to make ourselves, as it were, dumb and blind, uttering never a word, not so much as a monosyllable, and abiding in the dark. In such sort indeed it might be, because they do not intrude upon my chamber. But theirs is so near to mine, that the very least whisper could not but be heard." "Nay, but, madam," returned the rector, "let not this stand in our way for a night or two, until I may bethink me where else we might be more at our ease." "Be that as you will, sir," quoth the lady, "I do but entreat that the affair be kept close, so that never a word of it get wind." "Have no fear on that score, madam," replied the priest, "and if so it may be, let us foregather tonight." "With pleasure," returned the lady, and having appointed him how and when to come, she left him and went home. Now the lady had a maid that was none too young, and had a countenance the ugliest and most misshapen that ever was seen. For indeed she was flat-nosed, wry-mouthed, and thick-lipped, with huge, ill-set teeth, eyes that squinted and were ever blurred, and a complexion betwixt green and yellow, that showed as if she had spent the summer not at Fiesole, but at Sinigaglia. Besides which she was hip-shot and somewhat halting on the right side. Her name was Chiuta, but for that she was such a scurvy bitch to look upon, she was called by all folk Ciutatze. And being thus misshapen of body, she was also not without her share of guile. So the lady called her and said, "Ciutatze, so thou wilt do me a service tonight, I will give thee a fine new shift." At the mention of the shift, Ciutatze made answer, "So you give me a shift, madam, I will throw myself into the very fire." "Good," said the lady, "then I would have thee lie tonight in my bed with a man, whom thou wilt caress. But look, thou say never a word, that my brothers, who, as thou knowest, sleep in the next room, hear thee not, and afterwards I will give thee the shift." "Sleep with a man?" quoth Ciutatze. "Why, if need be, I will sleep with 6." So in the evening Master Rector came as he had been bidden, and the 2 young men, as the lady had arranged, being in their room, and making themselves very audible, he stole noiselessly and in the dark into the lady's room, and got him onto the bed, which Ciutatze, well advised by the lady how to behave, mounted from the other side. Whereupon Master Rector, thinking to have the lady by his side, took Ciutatze in his arms and fell a-kissing her, saying never a word the while, and Ciutatze did the like, and so he enjoyed her, plucking the boon which he had so long desired. The rector and Ciutatze thus closeted, the lady charged her brothers to execute the rest of her plan. They accordingly stole quietly out of their room, and hied them to the piazza, where fortune proved propitious beyond what they had craved of her, for, it being a very hot night, the bishop had been seeking them, purposing to go home with them and solace himself with their society, and quench his thirst. With which desire he acquainted them, as soon as he espied them coming into the piazza, and so they escorted him to their house, and there in the cool of their little courtyard, which was bright with many a lamp, he took, to his no small comfort, a draught of their good wine. Which done, "Sir," said the young man, "since of your great courtesy you have deigned to visit our poor house, to which we were but now about to invite you, We should be gratified if you would be pleased to give a look at somewhat, a mere trifle though it be, which we have here to show you." The bishop replied that he would do so with pleasure, whereupon one of the young men took a lighted torch and led the way, the bishop and the rest following, to the chamber where Master Rector lay with Cittàzza. Now the rector, being in hot haste, had ridden hard, insomuch that he was already gotten above 3 miles on his way when they arrived, and so, being somewhat tired, he was resting, but, hot though the night was, he still held Cittàzza in his arms. In which posture he was shown to the bishop, when, preceded by the young man bearing the light, and followed by the others, he entered the chamber. And being roused, and observing the light and the folk that stood about him, Master Rector was mighty ashamed and affrighted, and popped his head under the clothes. But the bishop, reprimanding him severely, constrained him to thrust his head out again, and take a view of his bedfellow. Thus made aware of the trick which the lady had played him, the rector was now, both on that score and by reason of his signal disgrace, the saddest man that ever was, and his discomfiture was complete when, having donned his clothes, he was committed by the bishop's command to close custody and sent to prison, there to expiate his offence by a rigorous penance. The bishop was then fain to know how it had come about that he had foregathered there with Cittàzza. Whereupon the young man related the whole story, which ended, the bishop commended both the lady and the young man not a little, for that they had taken condign vengeance upon him without imbruing their hands in the blood of a priest. The bishop caused him to bewail his transgression 40 days, but what with his love and the scornful requital which it had received, he bewailed it more than 49 days, not to mention that for a great while he could not show himself in the street but the boys would point the finger at him and say, "There goes he that lay with Cittàzza," which was such an affliction to him that he was like to go mad. On this wise the worthy lady rid herself of the rector's vexatious importunity, and Cittàzza had a jolly night and earned her shift. End of Day 8, the Fourth Story.
Day 8, the Fifth Story. 3 young men pull down the breeches of a judge from the marshes, while he is administering justice on the bench.
So ended Emilia her story, and when all had commended the widow lady, "'Tis now thy turn to speak," quoth the queen, fixing her gaze upon Philostrato, who answered that he was ready, and forthwith thus began.
Sweet my ladies, by what I remember of that young man, to wit, Maso de Saggio, whom Elisa named a while ago, I am prompted to lay aside a story which I had meant to tell you, and to tell you another, touching him and some of his comrades, which, notwithstanding there are in it certain words, albeit 'tis not unseemly, which your modesty forbears to use, is yet so laughable that I shall relate it. As you may well have heard, there come not seldom to our city magistrates from the marches, who for the most part are men of a mean spirit, and in circumstances so reduced and beggarly that their whole life seems to be but a petty foppery, and by reason of this their inbred sordidness and avarice they bring with them judges and notaries that have rather the air of men taken from the plough, or the last then trained in the schools of law. Now one of these marchers, being come hither as podesta, brought with him judges not a few, and among them one that called himself Messer Nicola de San Lepido, who looked like to a locksmith than aught else. However, this fellow was assigned with the rest of the judges to hear criminal cases, and as folks will go often to court, though they have no concern whatever there, it so befell that Maso de Saggio went thither one morning in quest of one of his friends, and there chancing to set eyes on this Messer Nicola where he sate, deemed him a fowl of no common feather, and surveyed him from head to foot, observing that the vair which he wore on his head was all begrimed, that he carried an inkhorn from his girdle, and that his gown was longer than his robe, and many another detail quite foreign to the appearance of a man of birth and breeding, of which that which he deemed most notable was a pair of breeches, which, as he saw, for the judge's outer garments being none too ample were open in front while he sate, reached halfway down his legs, by which his mind was presently diverted from the friend whom he had come there to seek, and forth he hied him in quest of other 2 of his comrades, the one Ribby, the other Matuzio by name, fellows both of them not a whit less jolly than Maso himself, and having found them, he said to them, "As you love me, come with me to the court, and I will show you the queerest scarecrow that you ever saw." So the two men hied with him to the court, and there he pointed to the dais on which the master judge was seated. And there he pointed out to them the judge and his breeches. What they saw from a distance served to set them laughing. Then, drawing nearer to the dais on which the master judge was seated, they observed that 'twas easy enough to get under the dais, and moreover that the plank on which the judge's feet rested was broken, so that there was plenty of room for the passage of a hand and an arm. Whereupon quoth Maso to his comrades, "'Twere a very easy matter to pull these breeches right down, wherefore I propose that we do so." Each of the men had marked how it might be done, and so, having concerted both what they should do and what they should say, they came to the court again next morning, and the court being crowded, Mateuzo, observed by never a soul, slipped beneath the dais, and posted himself right under the spot where the judge's feet rested, while the other two men took their stand on either side of the judge, each laying hold of the hem of his robe. Then, Sir, I pray you, for God's sake," began Maso, "that, before the pilfering rascal that is there beside you can make off, you constrain him to give me back a pair of jackboots that he has stolen from me, which theft he still denies, though 'twas not a month since I saw him getting them resoled." Meanwhile Ribby, at the top of his voice, shouted, "Believe him not, sir, the scurvy knave. 'Tis but that he knows that I am come to demand restitution of a valise which he has stolen from me, that he now for the first time trumps up this story about a pair of jackboots that I have had in my house down to the last day or two. And if you doubt what I say, I can bring as witness Trecca, my neighbor, and Grassa, the tripe woman, and the one that goes about gathering the sweepings of Santa Maria a Verzaria, who saw him when he was on his way back from the farm." But, shout as he might, Maso was still even with him, nor for all that did Ribby bate a jot of his clamor. And while the judge stood, bending now towards the one, now towards the other, the better to hear them, Mateuzo seized his opportunity, and thrusting his hand through the hole in the plank, caught hold of the judge's breeches and tugged at them amain, whereby down they came straightway, for the judge was a lean man, and shrunk in the buttocks. The judge, being aware of the accident, but knowing not how it came about, would have gathered his outer garments together in front, so as to cover the defect, but Maso on the one side and Ribby on the other held him fast, shouting amain and in chorus, "You do me a grievous wrong, sir, thus to deny me justice, nay, even a hearing, and to think of quitting the court. There needs no writ in this city for such a trifling a matter as this." And thus they held him by the clothes and in parley, until all that were in the court perceived that he had lost his breeches. However, after a while, Mateuzo dropped the breeches, and slipped off and out of the court without being observed. And Ribby, deeming that the joke had gone far enough, exclaimed, "By God, I vow I will appear to the syndics," while Maso, on the other hand, let go of the robe, saying, "Nay, but for my part, I will come here again, and again, and again, unless I find you less embarrassed than you seem to be today." And so, the one this way, the other that way, they made off with all speed. Whereupon Master Judge, disbreeched before all the world, was as one that awakens from sleep, albeit he is aware of his forlorn condition, and asks whither the parties in the case touching the jackboots and the valise were gone. However, as they could not be found, he fell a swearing by the bowels of God that 'twas meet and proper that he should know and wit whether 'twas the custom at Florence to disbreech judges sitting in the seat of justice. When the affair reached the ears of the Podesta, he made no little stir about it, but, being informed by some of his friends that 'twould not have happened but that the Florentines were minded to show him that, in the place of the judges he should have brought with him, he had brought but gawks, to save expense, he deemed it the best way to say no more about it, and so for that the matter went no further. End of Day 8, the Fifth Story.
Day 8, the Sixth Story. Bruno and Buffalmacco steal a pig from Calandrino, and induce him to essay its recovery by means of pills of ginger and vernaccia. Of the said pills they give him 2, one after the other, made of dog ginger compounded with aloes. And it then appearing as if he had had the pig himself, they constrain him to buy them off, if he would not have them tell his wife.
Philostratus' story, which elicited not a little laughter, was no sooner ended than the queen bade Philomela follow suit, wherefore thus Philomela began.
As, gracious ladies, 'twas the name of Maso del Saggio that prompted Philostratto to tell the story that you have but now heard, even so 'tis with me in regard of Calandrino and his comrades, of whom I am minded to tell you another story, which you will, I think, find entertaining. Who Calandrino, Bruno, and Buffalmacco were, I need not explain. You know them well enough from the former story, and therefore I will tarry no longer than to say that Calandrino had a little estate not far from Florence, which his wife had brought him by way of dowry, and which yielded them yearly, among other matters, a pig, and 'twas his custom every year in the month of December to resort to the farm with his wife, there to see the killing and salting of the said pig. Now one of these years it so happened that his wife being unwell, Calandrino went thither alone to kill the pig, and Bruno and Buffalmacco, learning that he was gone to the farm, and that his wife was not with him, betook them to the house of a priest that was their especial friend and a neighbour of Calandrino, there to tarry a while. Upon their arrival, Calandrino, who had that very morning killed the pig, met them with the priest, and accosted them, saying, "A hearty welcome to you. I should like you to see what an excellent manager I am." And so he took them into his house, and showed them the pig. They observed that 'twas a very fine pig, and learned from Calandrino that he was minded to salt it for household consumption. "Then thou art but a fool," quoth Bruno. "Sell it, man, and let us have a jolly time with the money, and tell thy wife that 'twas stolen." "Not I," replied Calandrino. "She would never believe me, and would drive me out of the house. Urge me no further, for I will never do it." The others said a great deal more, but to no purpose, and Calandrino bade them to supper, but so coldly that they declined, and left him. Presently, "Should we not steal this pig from him to-night?" quoth Bruno to Buffalmacco. "Could we so?" returned Buffalmacco. "How?" "Why, as to that," rejoined Bruno, "I have already marked how it may be done, if he bestow not the pig elsewhere." "So be it, then," said Buffalmacco. "We will steal it, and then perchance our good host, Master Priest, will join us in doing honour to such a good cheer." "That right gladly will I," quoth the priest. Whereupon, "Some address, though," quoth Bruno, "will be needful. Thou knowest, Buffalmacco, what a niggardly fellow Calandrino is, and how greedily he drinks at other folks' expense. Go we therefore, and take him to the tavern, and there let the priest make as if, to do us honour, he would pay the whole score, and suffer Calandrino to pay never a soldo, and he will grow tipsy, and then we shall speed excellent well, because he is alone in the house." As Bruno proposed, so they did, and Calandrino, finding that the priest would not suffer him to pay, drank amain, and took a great deal more aboard than he had need of, and the night being far spent when he left the tavern, he dispensed with supper, and went home, and thinking to have shut the door, got him to bed, leaving it open. Buffalmacco and Bruno went to sup with the priest, and after supper, taking with them certain implements with which to enter Calandrino's house, where Bruno thought it most feasible, they stealthily approached it, but finding the door open, they entered and took down the pig, and carried it away to the priest's house, and having there bestowed it safely, went to bed. In the morning, when Calandrino, his head at length quit of the fumes of the wine, got up, and came downstairs, and found that his pig was nowhere to be seen, and that the door was open, he asked this, that, and the other man, whether they wist who had taken the pig away, and getting no answer, he began to make a great outcry. Alas, alas, luckless man that I am, that my pig should have been stolen from me. Meanwhile, Bruno and Buffalmacco, being also risen, made up to him, to hear what he would say touching the pig. Whom he no sooner saw, than well nigh weeping he called them, saying, Alas, my friends, my pig is stolen from me. Bruno stepped up to him, and said in a low tone, 'Tis passing strange if thou art in the right for once. Alas, returned Calandrino, what I say is but too true. Why then, out with it, man, quoth Bruno, cry aloud, that all folk may know that 'tis so. Calandrino then raised his voice and said, By the body of God, I say of a truth that my pig has been stolen from me. So, quoth Bruno, but publish it, man, publish it, lift thy voice, make thyself well heard, that all may believe thy report. Thou art enough to make me give my soul to the enemy, replied Calandrino. I say, dost not believe me? That hang me by the neck if the pig is not stolen from me. Nay, but, quoth Bruno, how can it be? I saw it here but yesterday. Dost think to make me believe that it has taken to itself wings and flown away? All the same, 'tis as I tell thee, returned Calandrino. Is it possible? Quoth Bruno. Ay, indeed, replied Calandrino, 'tis even so, and I am undone, and know not how to go home. Never will my wife believe me, or, if she do so, I shall know no peace this year. Upon my hope of salvation, quoth Bruno, 'tis indeed a bad business, if so it really is. But thou knowest, Calandrino, that 'twas but yesterday I counselled thee to make believe that 'twas so. I should be sorry to think thou didst before thy wife and us at the same time. Ah, vociferated Calandrino, wilt thou drive me to despair and provoke me to blaspheme God and the saints and all the company of heaven? I tell thee that the pig has been stolen from me in the night. Whereupon, if so it be, quoth Buffalmacco, we must find a way, if we can, to recover it. Find a way? Said Calandrino. How can we compass that? Why, replied Buffalmacco, 'tis certain that no one has come from India to steal thy pig. It must have been one of thy neighbours, and if thou couldst bring them together, I warrant thee, I know how to make the essay with bread and cheese, and we will find out in a trice who has had the pig. Ay, struck in Bruno, make thy essay with bread and cheese in the presence of these gentry hereabout, one of whom I am sure has had the pig. Why, the thing would be seen through, and they would not come. What shall we do then? Said Buffalmacco. Whereto Bruno made answer, it must be done with good pills of ginger and good vernaccia, and they must be bidden come drink with us. They will suspect nothing, and will come, and pills of ginger can be blessed just as well as bread and cheese. Beyond a doubt thou art right, quoth Buffalmacco, and thou, Calandrino, what sayest thou? Shall we do as Bruno says? Nay, I entreat you, for the love of God, quoth Calandrino, do even so, for I knew but who had had the pig. I should feel myself half consoled for my loss. Go to now, quoth Bruno, I am willing to do thy errand to Florence for these commodities, if thou givest me the money. Calandrino had some 40 soldi upon him, which he gave to Bruno, who thereupon hied him to Florence to a friend of his that was an apothecary, and bought a pound of good pills of ginger, 2 of which, being of dog ginger, he caused to be compounded with fresh hepatic aloes, and then to be coated with sugar like the others, and lest they should be lost, or any of the others mistaken for them, he had a slight mark set upon them, by which he might readily recognize them. He also bought a flask of good vernaccia, and, thus laden, returned to the farm, and said to Calandrino, "Tomorrow morning thou wilt bid those whom thou suspectest to come hither to drink with thee. As 'twill be a saint's day, it will all come readily enough, and to-night I and Buffalmacco will say the incantation over the pills, which in the morning I will bring to thee here, and for our friendship's sake will administer them myself, and do and say all that needs to be said and done." So Calandrino did as Bruno advised, and on the morning a goodly company, as well of young men from Florence that happened to be in the village, as of husbandmen, being assembled in front of the church around the elm, Bruno and Buffalmacco came, bearing a box containing the ginger and the flask of wine, and ranged the folk in a circle. Whereupon, "Gentlemen," said Bruno, "'tis meet I tell you the reason why you are gathered here, that if aught unpleasant to you should befall, you may have no ground for complaint against me. Calandrino here was the night before last robbed of a fine pig, and cannot discover who has had it, and for that it must have been stolen by some one of us here. He would have each of you take and eat one of these pills and drink of this vernaccia. Wherefore I forthwith do you wit that whose has had the pig will not be able to swallow the pill, but find it more bitter than poison, and will spit it out, and so, rather than he should suffer this shame in presence of so many, 'twere perhaps best that he that has had the pig should confess the fact to the priest, and I will wash my hands of the affair." All professed themselves ready enough to eat the pills, and so, having set them in a row with Calandrino among them, Bruno, beginning at one end, proceeded to give each a pill, and when he came to Calandrino, he chose one of the pills of dog ginger, and put it in his hand. Calandrino thrust it forthwith between his teeth, and began to chew it, but no sooner was his tongue acquainted with the aloes, than, finding the bitterness intolerable, he spat it out. Now, the eyes of all the company being fixed on one another to see who should spit out his pill, Bruno, not having finished the distribution, feigned to be concerned with naught else, heard some one in his rear say, "Ha, Calandrino, what means this?" and at once turning round, and marking that Calandrino had spit out his pill, "Wait a while," quoth he, "perchance 'twas somewhat else that caused thee to spit. Take another." And thereupon, whipping out the other pill of dog ginger, he set it between Calandrino's teeth, and finished the distribution. Bitter as Calandrino had found the former pill, he found this tenfold more so, but being ashamed to spit it out, he kept it a while in his mouth, and chewed it, and as he did so, tears stood in his eyes that showed as large as filberts, and at length, being unable to bear it any longer, he spat it out, as he had its predecessor, which, being observed by Buffalmacco and Bruno, who were then administering the wine, and by all the company, 'twas averred by common consent that Calandrino had committed the theft himself, for which cause certain of them took him severely to task. However, the company being dispersed, and Bruno and Buffalmacco left alone with Calandrino, Buffalmacco began on this wise: "I never doubted but that thou hadst had it thyself, and wast minded to make us believe that it had been stolen from thee, that we might not have of thee so much as a single drink out of the price which thou gottest for it." Calandrino, with the bitterness of the aloes still on his tongue, fell a swearing that he had not had it. Whereupon, "Nay, but comrade," quoth Buffalmacco, "upon thy honour, what did it fetch? 6 florins?" Whereto, Calandrino, being now on the verge of desperation, Bruno added, "Now be reasonable, Calandrino. Among the company that ate and drank with us, there was one that told me that thou hadst up there a girl that thou didst keep for thy pleasure, giving her what by hook or by crook thou couldst get together, and that he held it for certain that thou hadst sent her this pig, and thou art grown expert in this sort of cozenage. Thou tookest us one while adown the Mugon, a gathering black stones, and having thus started us on a wild goose chase, thou madest off, and then wouldst fain have us believe that thou hadst found the stone, and now, in like manner, thou thinkest by thine oaths to persuade us that this pig that thou hast given away or sold has been stolen from thee. But we know thy tricks of old, never another couldst thou play us. and to be round with thee, the spell has cost us some trouble, wherefore we mean that thou shalt give us pair of capons, or we will let Monna Tessa know all." Seeing that he was not believed, and deeming his mortification ample without the addition of his wife's resentment, Calandrino gave them the 2 pair of capons, with which, when the pig was salted, they returned to Florence, leaving Calandrino with the loss and the laugh against him. End of Day 8. The 6th Story.
Day 8. The 7th Story. A scholar loves a widow lady, who, being enamoured of another, causes him to spend a winter's night awaiting her in the snow. He afterwards, by a stratagem, causes her to stand for a whole day in July, naked upon a tower, exposed to the flies, the gadflies, and the sun.
Over the woes of poor Calandrino the ladies laughed not a little, and had laughed yet more, but it irked them that those that had robbed him of the pig should also take from him the capons. However, the story being ended, the queen bade Pampinea give them hers, and thus forthwith Pampinea began.
Dearest ladies, it happens oftentimes that the artful scorner meets his match, wherefore 'tis only little wits that delight to scorn. In a series of stories we have heard tell of tricks played without aught in the way of reprisals following. By mine I purpose in some degree to excite your compassion for a gentlewoman of our city, albeit the retribution that came upon her was but just, whose flout was returned in the like sort, and to such effect that she well nigh died thereof. The which to hear will not be unprofitable to you, for thereby you will learn to be more careful how you flout others, and therein you will do very wisely. 'Tis not many years since there dwelt at Florence a lady young and fair, and of a high spirit, and also of right gentle lineage, and tolerably well endowed with temporal goods. Now, Elena, such was the lady's name, being left a widow, was minded never to marry again, being enamoured of a handsome young gallant of her own choosing, with whom she, recking naught of any other lover, did, by the help of a maid in whom she placed much trust, not seldom speed the time gaily and with marvellous delight. Meanwhile it so befell that a young nobleman of our city, Rinieri by name, who had spent much time in study at Paris, not that he might thereafter sell his knowledge by retail, but that he might learn the reasons and causes of things, which accomplishment shows to most excellent advantage in a gentleman, returned to Florence, and there lived as a citizen in no small honour with his fellows, both by reason of his rank and of his learning. But, as it is often the case, that those who are most versed in deep matters are the soonest mastered by love, so was it with Rinieri. For at a festal gathering, to which one day he went, there appeared before his eyes this Elena, of whom we spoke, clad in black, as is the wont of our Florentine widows, and showing to his mind so much fairer and more debonair than any other woman that he had ever seen, that happy indeed he deemed the man might call himself, to whom God in his goodness should grant the right to hold her naked in his arms. So now and again he eyed her stealthily, and knowing that boons goodly and precious are not to be gotten without trouble, he made up his mind to study and labour with all assiduity how best to please her, that he might win her love and thereby the enjoyment of her. The young gentlewoman was not used to keep her eyes bent ever towards the infernal regions, but, rating herself at no less, if not more, than her deserts, she was dexterous to move them to and fro, and thus busily scanning her company, soon detected the man who regarded her with pleasure. By which means, having discovered Ranieri's passion, she inly laughed, and said, "'Twill turn out that 'twas not for nothing that I came here to-day, for if I mistake not, I have caught a gander by the bill." So she gave him an occasional sidelong glance, and sought as best she might to make him believe that she was not indifferent to him, deeming that the more men she might captivate by her charms, the higher those charms would be rated, and most especially by him whom she had made lord of them and her love. The erudite scholar bade adieu to philosophical meditation, for the lady entirely engrossed his mind, and, having discovered her house, he, thinking to please her, found divers pretexts for frequently passing by it. Whereon the lady, her vanity flattered for the reason aforesaid, plumed herself not a little, and showed herself pleased to see him. Thus encouraged, the scholar found means to make friends with her maid, to whom he discovered his love, praying her to do her endeavour with her mistress, that he might have her favour. The maid was profuse of promises, and gave her mistress his message, which she no sooner heard than she was convulsed with laughter, and replied, "He brought sense enough hither from Paris. Knowest thou where he has since been to lose it? Go to now, let us give him what he seeks. Tell him, when he next speaks to you of the matter, that I love him vastly more than he loves me, but that I must have regard to my reputation, so that I may be able to hold my head up among other ladies, which, if he is really the wise man they say, will cause him to affect me much more." Ah, poor woman, poor woman! She little knew, my ladies, how rash it is to try conclusions with scholars. The maid found the scholar, and did her mistress's errand. The scholar, overjoyed, proceeded to urge his suit with more ardour, to indite letters, and send presents. The lady received all that he sent her, but vouchsafed no answers, save such as were couched in general terms, and on this wise she kept him dangling a long while. At last, having disclosed the whole affair to her lover, who evinced some resentment and jealousy, she, to convince him that his suspicions were groundless, and for that she was much importuned by the scholar, sent word to him by her maid, that never since he had assured her of his love had occasion served her to him pleasure, but that next Christmas tide she hoped to be with him, wherefore, if he were minded to await her in the courtyard of her house on the night of the day next following the feast, she would meet him there as soon as she could. Elated as never another, the scholar hied him at the appointed time to the lady's house, and being ushered into a courtyard by the maid, who forthwith turned the key upon him, addressed himself there to await the lady's coming. Now, the lady's lover, by her appointment, was with her that evening, and when they had gaily supped, she told him what she had in hand that night, adding, "And so thou wilt be able to gauge the love which I have borne and bear this scholar, whom thou hast foolishly regarded as a rival." The lover heard the lady's words with no small delight, and waited in eager expectancy to see her make them good. The scholar, hanging about there in the courtyard, began to find it somewhat chillier than he would have liked, for it had snowed hard all day long, so that the snow lay everywhere thick on the ground. However, he bore it patiently, expecting to be recompensed by and by. After a while, the lady said to her lover, "Go we to the chamber, and take a peep through a lattice at him of whom thou art turned jealous, and mark what he does, and how he will answer the maid, whom I have bidden go speak with him." So the pair hied them to a lattice, wherethrough they could see without being seen, and heard the maid call from another lattice to the scholar, saying, "Ranieri, my lady is distressed as never woman was, for that one of her brothers is come here to-night, and after talking a long while with her, must needs sup with her, and is not yet gone, but I think he will soon be off, and that is the reason why she has not been able to come to thee. But she will come soon now. She trusts it does not irk thee to wait so long." Whereto the scholar, supposing that was true, made answer, "Tell my lady to give herself no anxiety on my account until she can conveniently come to me, but to do so as soon as she may." Whereupon the maid withdrew from the window and went to bed, while the lady said to her lover, "Now, what sayest thou? Think'st thou that, if I had that regard for him which thou fearest, I would suffer him to tarry below there to get frozen?" Which said the lady, and her now partly reassured lover got them to bed. Where for a great while they disported them right gamesomely, laughing together and making merry over the luckless scholar. The scholar meanwhile paced up and down the courtyard to keep himself warm, nor indeed had he where to sit or take shelter. In this plight he bestowed many a curse upon the lady's brother for his long tarrying, and never a sound did he hear but he thought that 'twas the lady opening the door. But vain indeed were his hopes. The lady, having solaced herself with her lover until hard upon midnight, then said to him, "How ratest thou our scholar, my soul? Whether is the greater his wit, or the love I bear him, think'st thou? Will the cold, that of my ordaining he now suffers, banish from thy breast the suspicion which my light words the other day implanted there?" "Ay, indeed, heart of my body," replied the lover, "well wot I now, that even as thou art to me, my weal, my consolation, my bliss, so am I to thee." "So," quoth the lady, "then I must have full 1,000 kisses from thee to prove that thou sayest sooth." The lover's answer was to strain her to his heart, and give her not merely 1,000, but 100,000 kisses. In such converse they dallied a while longer, and then, "Get we up now," quoth the lady, "that we may go see if 'tis quite spent that fire, with which, as he wrote to me daily, this new lover of mine used to burn." So up they got and hied them to the lattice which they had used before, and peering out into the courtyard, saw the scholar dancing a hornpipe to the music that his own teeth made, a chattering for extremity of cold. Nor had they ever seen it footed so nimbly and at such a pace. Whereupon, "How sayest thou, sweet my hope?" quoth the lady. "Know I not how to make men dance without the aid of either trumpet or cornemuse?" "Indeed thou dost, my heart's delight," replied the lover. Quoth then the lady, "I have a mind that we go down to the door. Thou wilt keep quiet, and I will speak to him, and we shall hear what he says, where peradventure we shall find no less diverting than the sight of him." So they stole softly out of the chamber and down to the door, which leaving fast closed, the lady set her lips to a little hole that was there, and with a low voice called the scholar, who, hearing her call him, praised God, making too sure that he was to be admitted, and being come to the door, said, "Here I am, madam. Open, for God's sake. Let me in, for I die of cold." "Oh, ay," replied the lady, "I know thou hast a chill, and of course there being a little snow about, 'tis mighty cold, but well I wot the nights are colder far at Paris. I cannot let thee in as yet, because my accursed brother, that came to sup here this evening, is still with me. But he will soon take himself off, and then I will let thee in without a moment's delay. I have but now with no small difficulty given him the slip, to come and give thee heart, that the waiting irk thee not." "Nay, but, madam," replied the scholar, "for the love of God, I entreat you let me in, that I may have a roof over my head, because for some time past there has been never so thick a fall of snow, and 'tis yet snowing, and then I will wait as long as you please." "Alas, sweet my love," quoth the lady, "that I may not, for this door makes such a din when one opens it, that my brother would be sure to hear, were I to let thee in. But I will go tell him to get him gone, and so come back and admit thee." "Go at once then," returned the scholar, "and prithee, see that a good fire be kindled, that when I get in I may warm myself, for I am now so chilled through and through that I have scarce any feeling left." "That can scarce be," rejoined the lady, "if it be true, what thou hast protested in thy letters, that thou art all afire for love of me. 'Tis plain to me now that thus did but mock me. I now take my leave of thee. Wait, and be of good cheer." So the lady and her lover, who, to his immense delight, had heard all that had passed, betook them to bed. However, little sleep they had that night, but spent the best part of it in disporting themselves and making merry over the unfortunate scholar, who, his teeth now chattering to such a tune that he seemed to have been metamorphosed into a stork, perceived that he had been befooled, and after making divers fruitless attempts to open the door, and seeking means of egress to no better purpose, paced to and fro like a lion, cursing the villainous weather, the long night, his simplicity, and the perversity of the lady, against whom the vehemence of his wrath suddenly converting the love he had so long borne to her bitter and remorseless enmity, he now plotted within himself diverse and grand schemes of revenge, on which he was far more bent than ever he had been on foregathering with her. slowly the night wore away, and with the first streaks of dawn the maid, by her mistress's direction, came down, opened the door of the courtyard, and, putting on a compassionate air, greeted Rinieri with, "Foul fall him that came here yestereve! He has afflicted us with his presence all night long, and has kept thee a-freezing out here. But hark ye, take it not amiss, that which might not be to-night shall be another time. Well wot I not could have befallen that my lady could so ill brook." For all his wrath, the scholar, witting, like the wise man he was, that menaces serve but to put the menaced on his guard, kept pent within his breast that which unbridled resentment would have uttered, and said quietly, and without betraying the least trace of anger, "In truth, 'twas the worst night I ever spent, but I understand quite well that the lady was in no wise to blame, for that she herself, being moved to pity of me, came down here to make her excuses, and to comfort me. And, as thou sayest, what has not been to-night will be another time. Wherefore commend me to her, and so adieu." Then, well nigh paralyzed for cold, he got him, as best as he might, home, where, weary and fit to die for drowsiness, he threw himself on his bed, and fell into a deep sleep, from which he awoke to find that he had all but lost the use of his arms and legs. He therefore sent some physicians, and having told them what a chill he had gotten, caused them to have a care to his health. But, though they treated him with active and most drastic remedies, it cost them some time and no little trouble to restore to the cramped muscles their wonted pliancy. And indeed, but for his youth and the milder weather that was at hand, it would have gone very hard with him. However, recover he did his health and lustihood, and nursing his enmity, feigned to be vastly more enamoured of his widow than ever before. And so it was that after a while fortune furnished him with an opportunity of satisfying his resentment, for the gallant of whom the widow was enamoured, utterly regardless of the love she bore him, grew enamoured of another lady, and was minded no more to pleasure the widow in aught, either by word or by deed, wherefore she now pined in tears and bitterness of spirit. However, her maid, who commiserated her not a little, and knew not how to dispel the dumps that the loss of her lover had caused her, espying the scholar pass along the street, as he had been wont, conceived the silly idea that the lady's lover might be induced to return to his old love by some practice of a necromantic order, wherein she doubted not that the scholar must be a thorough adept, which idea she imparted to her mistress. The lady, being none too well furnished with sense, never thinking that if the scholar had been an adept in necromancy, he would have made use of it in his own behoof, gave heed to what her maid said, and forthwith bade her learn of the scholar whether he would plan his skill at her service, and assure him that, if he did so, she, in guerdon thereof, would do his pleasure. The maid did her mistress's errand well and faithfully. The scholar no sooner heard the message than he said to himself, Praised be thy name, O God, that the time is now come, when with thy help I may be avenged upon this wicked woman of the wrong she did me in requital of the great love I bore her. Then, turning to the maid, he said, Tell my lady to set her mind at ease touching this matter, for that, were her lover in India, I would forthwith bring him hither to crave her pardon of that wherein he has offended her. As to the course she should take in the matter, I tarry but her pleasure to make it known to her, when and where she may think fit. Tell her so, and bid her from me to be of good cheer. The maid carried his answer to her mistress, and arranged that they should meet in the church of Santa Lucia of Prato. Thither accordingly they came, the lady and the scholar, and conversed apart, and the lady, quite oblivious of the ill usage by which she had well nigh done him to death, opened all her mind to him, and besought him, if he had any regard to her welfare, to aid her to the attainment of her desire. Madam, replied the scholar, true it is that among other law that I acquired at Paris was this of necromancy, whereof indeed I know all that may be known. But as 'tis in the last degree displeasing to God, I had sworn never to practise it either for my own or for any other's behoof. 'Tis also true that the love I bear you is such that I know not how to refuse you aught that you would have me do for you. And so, were this single essay enough to consign me to hell, I would adventure it to pleasure you. But I mind me that 'tis a matter scarce so easy of performance, as perchance you suppose, most especially when a woman would fain recover the love of a man, or a man that of a woman, for then it must be done by the postulant in proper person, and at night, and in lonely places, and unattended, so that it needs a stout heart. Nor know I whether you are disposed to comply with these conditions. The lady, too enamoured to be discreet, made answer, So shrewdly does love goad me, that there is naught I would not do to bring him back to me who wrongfully has deserted me. But tell me, prithee, wherein it is that I have need of this stout heart. Madam, returned the despiteful scholar, 'twill be my part to fashion in tin an image of him you would fain lure back to you. And when I have sent you the image, 'twill be for you, when the moon is well on the wane, to dip yourself, being stark naked, and the image 7 times in a flowing stream. And this you must do quite alone about the hour of first sleep. And afterwards, still naked, you must get you upon some tree or some deserted house, and facing the north, with the image in your hand, say certain words that I shall give you in writing 7 times, which, when you have done, there will come to you 2 damsels, the fairest you ever saw, who will greet you graciously and ask of you what you would fain have, to whom you will disclose frankly and fully all that you crave, and see to it that you make no mistake in the name, and when you have said all, they will depart, and you may then descend and return to the spot where you left your clothes, and resume them, and go home. And rest assured that before the ensuing midnight your lover will come to you in tears, and crave your pardon and mercy, and that thenceforth he will never again desert you for any other woman. The lady gave entire credence to the scholar's words, and deeming her lover as good as in her arms again, recovered half her wonted spirits. Wherefore, "Make no doubt," quoth she, "that I shall do as thou bidst. And indeed I am most favoured by circumstance, for in Upper Valdarno I have an estate adjoining the river, and 'tis now July, so that to bathe will be delightful. Ay, and now I mind me that at no great distance from this river there is a little tower, which is deserted, save that now and again the shepherds will get them up by the chestnut wood ladder to the roof, thence to look out for their strayed sheep. 'Tis a place lonely indeed, and quite out of ken, and when I have clomb it, and climb it I will, I doubt not 'twill be the best place in all the world to give effect to your instructions." Well pleased to be certified of the lady's intention, the scholar, to whom her estate and the tower were very well known, made answer, "I was never in those parts, madam, and therefore know neither your estate nor the tower. But if it is as you say, it will certainly be the best place in the world for your purpose. So when time shall serve, I will send you the image and the orison. But I pray you, when you shall have your heart's desire, and know that I have done you good service, do not forget me, but keep your promise to me." "That will I without fail," quoth the lady, and so she bade him farewell, and went home. The scholar, gleefully anticipating the success of his enterprise, fashioned an image, and inscribed it with certain magical signs, and wrote some gibberish, by way of orison, which in due time he sent to the lady, bidding her the very next night do as he had prescribed. And thereupon he hied him privily with one of his servants to the house of a friend hard by the tower, there to carry his purpose into effect. The lady, on her part, set out with her maid, and betook her to her estate, and, night being come, sent the maid to bed, as if she were minded to go to rest herself, and about the hour of first sleep stole out of the house and down to the tower beside the Arno. And when, having carefully looked about her, she was satisfied that never a soul was to be seen or heard, she took off her clothes and hid them under a bush. Then, with the image in her hand, she dipped herself 7 times in the river, which done she hied her with the image to the tower. The scholar, having at nightfall couched himself with his servant among the willows and other trees that fringed the bank, marked all that she did, and how, as she passed by him, the whiteness of her flesh dispelled the shades of night, and scanning attentively her bosom and every other part of her body, and finding them very fair, felt, as he bethought him what would shortly befall them, some pity of her, while on the other hand he was suddenly assailed by the solicitations of the flesh, which caused that to stand which had been inert, and prompted him to sally forth of his ambush and take her by force, and have his pleasure on her. And, what with his compassion and passion, he was like to be worsted. But then, as he bethought him who he was, and what a grievous wrong had been done him, and for what cause, and by whom, his wrath, thus rekindled, got the better of the other affections, so that he swerved not from his resolve, but suffered her to go her way. The lady ascended the tower, and standing with her face to the north, began to recite the scholar's orison, while he, having stolen into the tower but a little behind her, cautiously shifted the ladder that led up to the roof on which the lady stood, and waited to observe what she would say and do. 7 times the lady said the orison, and then awaited the appearance of the 2 damsels, and so long had she to wait, not to mention that the night was a good deal cooler than she would have liked, that she saw daybreak, whereupon, disconcerted that it had not fallen out as the scholar had promised, she said to herself, I misdoubt me he was minded to give me such a night as I gave him. But if such was his intent, he is but maladroit in his revenge, for this night is not as long by a third as his was. Besides which the cold is of another quality. And that day might not overtake her there. She began to think of descending, but finding that the ladder was removed, she felt as if the world had come to naught beneath her feet. Her senses reeled, and she fell in a swoon upon the floor of the roof. When she came to herself, she burst into tears and piteous lamentations, and witting now very well that 'twas the doing of the scholar, she began to repent her that she had first offended him. And then trusting him unduly, having such good cause to reckon upon his enmity, in which frame she abode long time. Then searching, if haply she might find some means of descent, and finding none, she fell a-weeping again, and bitterly to herself she said, Alas for thee, wretched woman! What will thy brothers, thy kinsmen, thy neighbours, nay, what will all Florence say of thee, when 'tis known that thou hast been found here naked? Thy honour, hitherto unsuspect, will be known to have been but a show. And shouldst thou seek thy defence in lying excuses, if any such may be fashioned, the accursed scholar, who knows all thy doings, will not suffer it. Ah, poor wretch, that at one and the same time hast lost thy 2 dearly cherished gallant and thine own honour. And therewith she was taken with such a transport of grief, that she was like to cast herself from the tower to the ground. Then, bethinking her that if she might espy some lad making towards the tower with his sheep, she might send him for the maid, for the sun was now risen, she approached one of the parapets of the tower, and looked out, and so it befell that the scholar, awakening from a slumber, in which he had lain a while at the foot of a bush, espied her, and she him. Whereupon, Good day, madam, quoth he. Are the damsels yet come? The lady saw and heard him not without bursting afresh into a flood of tears, and besought him to come into the tower that she might speak with him, a request which the scholar very courteously granted. The lady then threw herself prone on the floor of the roof, and, only her head being visible through the aperture, thus through her sobs she spoke. Verily, Ranieri, if I gave thee a bad night, thou art well avenged on me. For though it be July, meseemed I was sore cold last night, standing here with never a thread upon me. And besides, I have so bitterly bewept both the trick I played thee and my own folly in trusting thee, that I marvel that I still have eyes in my head. Whereupon I implore thee, not for love of me, whom thou hast no cause to love, but for the respect thou hast for thyself as a gentleman, that thou let that which thou hast already done suffice thee to avenge the wrong I did thee, and bring me my clothes, that I may be able to get me down from here, and spare to take me from that which, however thou mightst hereafter wish, thou couldst not restore to me. My honour, to wit, my honour. Whereas if I deprived thee of that one night with me, 'tis in my power to give thee many another night in recompense thereof, and thou hast but to choose thine own times. Let this then suffice, and like a worthy gentleman to be satisfied to have taken thy revenge, and to have let me know it. Put not forth thy might against a woman. 'Tis no glory to the eagle to have vanquished a dove. Wherefore, for God's and thine own honour's sake, have mercy on me. The scholar, albeit his haughty spirit still brooded on her evil entreatment of him, yet saw her not weep and supplicate without a certain compunction mingling with his exultation. But vengeance he had desired above all things. To have wreaked it was indeed sweet, and albeit his humanity prompted him to have compassion on the hapless woman, yet it availed not to subdue the fierceness of his resentment. Wherefore thus he made answer, Madam Elena, had my prayers, albeit art I had none to mingle with them tears and honeyed words as thou dost with thine, inclined thee that night, where I stood perishing with cold amid the snow that filled thy courtyard, to accord me the very least shelter. 'Twere but a light matter for me to hearken now to thine. But if thou art now so much more careful of thy honour than thou wast wont to be, and it irks thee to tarry there naked, address thy prayers to him, in whose arms it irked thee not naked to pass that night thou mightst thee of. Albeit thou wist that I with hasty foot was beating time upon the snow in thy courtyard to the accompaniment of chattering teeth. 'Tis he that thou shouldst call to succour thee, to fetch thy clothes, to adjust the ladder for thy descent. 'Tis he in whom thou shouldst labour to inspire this tenderness now thou showest for thy honour, that honour which for his sake thou hast not sculptured to jeopardize both now and on 1,000 other occasions. Why then callest thou not him to come to thy succour, to whom pertains it rather than to him? Thou art his. And of whom will he have a care? Whom will he succour, if not thee? Thou asked him that night, when thou wast wantoning with him, whether seemed to him the greater my folly, or the love thou didst bear him. Call him now, foolish woman, and see if the love thou bearest him, and thy wit and his, may avail to deliver thee from my folly. 'Tis now no longer in thy power to show me courtesy of that which I no more desire, nor yet to refuse it, did I desire it. Reserve thy nights for thy lover, if so be thou go hence alive. Be they all thine and his. One of them was more than I cared for. 'Tis enough for me to have been flouted once. Ay, and by thy cunning of speech thou strivest might and main to conciliate my goodwill, calling me worthy gentleman. By which insinuation thou wouldst fain induce me magnanimously to desist from further chastisement of thy baseness. But thy cajoleries shall not now cloud the eyes of my mind, as did once thy false promises. I know myself, and better now for thy one night's instruction than for all the time I spent at Paris. But, granted that I were disposed to be magnanimous, thou art not of those to whom 'tis meet to show magnanimity. O wild beast, such as thou, having merited vengeance, can claim no relief from suffering save death. Though in the case of a human being, 'twould suffice to temper vengeance with mercy, as thou saidst. Wherefore I, albeit no eagle, witting thee to be no dove, but a venomous serpent, mankind's most ancient enemy, am minded, bating no jot of malice or of might, to harry thee to the bitter end. Nevertheless, this which I do is not properly to be called vengeance, but rather just retribution, seeing that vengeance should be in excess of the offence, and this my chastisement of thee will fall short of it. For were I minded to be avenged on thee, considering what account thou madest of my heart and soul, 'twould not suffice me to take thy life, no, nor the lives of 100 others such as thee, for I should but slay a vile and base and wicked woman. And what the devil art thou more than any other pitiful baggage, that I should spare thy little store of beauty, which a few years will ruin, covering thy face with wrinkles? And yet 'twas not for want of will that thou dost fail to do a death a worthy gentleman, as thou but now did call me, of whom in a single day of his life the world may well have more profit than of 100,000 like thee while the world shall last. Wherefore by this rude discipline I will teach thee what it is to flout men of spirit, and more especially what it is to flout scholars, that if thou escape with thy life, thou mayst have good cause ever hereafter to shun such folly. But if thou art so fain to make the descent, why not cast thyself down, whereby, God helping, thou wouldst at once break thy neck, be quit of the torment thou endurest, and make me the happiest man alive? I have no more to say to thee. 'Twas my art and craft thus caused thee climb. Be it thine to find the way down. Thou hadst cunning enough when thou wast minded to flout me. While the scholar thus spoke, the hapless lady wept incessantly, and before he had done to aggravate her misery, the sun was high in the heaven. However, when he was silent, thus she made answer: Ah, ruthless man, if that accursed night has so rankled with thee, and thou deemest my fault so grave that neither my youth and beauty, nor my bitter tears, nor yet my humble supplications may move thee to pity, let this at least move thee, and abate somewhat of thy remorseless severity, that 'twas my act alone, in that of late I trusted thee, and discovered to thee all my secret, that did open the way to compass thy end, and make me cognizant of my guilt, seeing that, had I not confided in thee, on no wise mightest thou have been avenged on me, which thou wouldst seem so ardently to have desired. Turn thee then, turn thee, I pray thee, from thy wrath, and pardon me. So thou wilt pardon me, and get me down hence, right gladly will I give up for ever my faithless gallant, and thou shalt be my sole lover and lord, albeit thou sayest hard things of my beauty, slight and short-lived as thou would have it to be, which, however it may compare with others, is, I wot, to be prized, if for no other reason, yet for this, that 'tis the admiration and solace and delight of young men, and thou art not yet old. And albeit I have been harshly treated by thee, yet believe I cannot that thou wouldst have me do myself so shamefully to death as to cast me down like some abandoned wretch before thine eyes, in which, unless thou wast then, as thou hast since shown thyself, a liar, I found such favour. Ah, have pity on me for God's and mercy's sake! The sun waxes exceedingly hot, and having suffered not a little by the cold of last night, I now begin to be sorely afflicted by the heat. Madam, rejoined the scholar, who held her in parley with no small delight, 'twas not for any love that thou didst bear me that thou trust'st me, but that thou mightst recover that which thou hadst lost, for which cause thou meritest but the greatest punishment, and foolish indeed art thou if thou suppose that such was the sole means available for my revenge. I had 1,000 others, and while I feigned to love thee, I had lain 1,000 gins for thy feet, into one or other of which in no long time, though this had not occurred, thou must needs have fallen, and that too to thy more grievous suffering and shame, nor was it to spare thee, but that I might be the sooner rejoiced by this thy discomfiture than I took my present course. And though all other means had failed me, I had still the pen, with which I would have written of thee such matters and in such a sort, that when thou wist them, as thou should have done, thou wouldst have regretted 1,000 times that thou had ever been born. The might of the pen is greater far than they suppose, who have not proved it by experience. By God I swear, so may he who has prospered me thus far in this my revenge prosper me to the end, that I would have written of thee things that would have so shamed thee in thine own, not to speak of others' sight, that thou hast pulled out thine eyes that thou mightst no more see thyself. Wherefore chide not the sea, for that it has sent forth a tiny rivulet. For thy love, or whether thou be mine or no, not care I. Be thou still his, whose thou hast been, if thou canst. Hate him, as I once did. I now love him by reason of his present entreatment of thee. Ye go getting you enamoured, ye women, and naught will satisfy you but young gallants, because ye mark that their flesh is ruddier, and their beards are blacker than other folks, and that they carry themselves well and foot it featly in the dance and joust. But those that are now more mature were even as they, and possess a knowledge which they have yet to acquire. And therewithal ye deem that they ride better, and cover more miles in a day than men of riper age. Now that they dust their pelisse with more vigour, I certainly allow. But their seniors, being more experienced, know better the places where the fleas lurk, and spare and dainty diet is preferable to abundance without savour. Moreover, hard trotting will gull and jade even the youngest, whereas an easy pace, though it bring one somewhat later to the inn, at any rate brings one thither fresh. Ye discern not, witless creatures that ye are, how much of evil this little show of bravery serves to hide. Your young gallant is neither content with one woman, but lusts after as many as he sets eyes on. Nor is there any but he deems himself worthy of her, wherefore 'tis not possible that their love should be lasting, as thou hast but now proved and may only too truly witness. Moreover, to be worshipped, to be caressed by their ladies they deem but their due, nor is there aught whereon they plume and boast them so proudly as their conquests, which impertinence has caused not a few women to surrender to the friars, who keep their own counsel. Peradventure thou wilt say that never a soul, save thy maid and I, wist aught of thy loves. But if so, thou hast been misinformed, and if thou so believest, thou dost misbelieve. Scarce aught else is talked of either in his quarter or in thine. But most often 'tis those most concerned, whose ears such matters reach last. Moreover, they rob you, these young gallants, whereas the others make you presents. So then, having made a bad choice, be thou still his to whom thou hast given thyself, and leave me, whom thou didst flout, to another. For I have found a lady of much greater charms than thine, and that has understood me better than thou didst. And that thou mayst get to the other world better certified of the desire of my eyes than thou wouldst seem to be here by my words, delay no more, but cast thyself down, whereby thy soul, taken forthwith, as I doubt not she will be, into the embrace of the devil. May see whether thy headlong fall afflicts mine eyes or no. But for that I doubt thou mean'st not thus to gladden me. I bid thee, if thou find'st the sun begin to scorch thee, remember the cold thou didst cause me to endure, wherewith by admixture thou mayst readily temper the sun's heat. The hapless lady, seeing that the scholar's words were ever to the same ruthless effect, burst afresh into tears, and said, Lo now, since naught that pertains to me may move thee, be thou at least moved by the love thou bearest this lady of whom thou speakest, whom thou sayest is wiser than I, and loves thee, and for love of her pardon me, and fetch me my clothes, so that I may resume them, and get me down hence. Whereat the scholar fell a laughing, and seeing that 'twas not a little past made answer, Lo now, I know not how to deny thee, adjuring me as thou dost by such a lady. Tell me then where thy clothes are, and I will go fetch them and bring thee down. The lady, believing him, was somewhat comforted, and told him where she had laid her clothes. The scholar then quitted the tower, bidding his servant on no account to stir from his post, but to keep close by, and, as best he might, bar the tower against all comers until his return, which, he said, he betook him to the house of his friend, where he breakfasted much at his ease, and thereafter went to sleep. Left alone upon the tower, the lady, somewhat cheered by her fond hope, but still exceeding sorrowful, drew nigh to a part of the wall where there was a little shade, and there sat down to wait. And now lost in most melancholy brooding, now dissolved in tears, now plunged in despair of ever seeing the scholar return with her clothes, but never more than a brief while in any one mood, spent with grief and the night's vigil, she by and by fell asleep. The sun was now in the zenith, and smote with extreme fervour full and unmitigated upon her tender and delicate frame, and upon her bare head, insomuch that his rays did not only scorch, but bit by bit excoriate every part of her flesh that was exposed to them, and so shrewdly burned her, that, albeit she was in a deep sleep, the pain awoke her. And, as by reason thereof she writhed a little, she felt the scorched skin part in sunder and shed itself, as will happen when one tugs at a parchment that has been singed by the fire, while her head ached so sore that it seemed like to split, and no wonder. Nor might she find place either to lie or stand on the floor of the roof, but ever went to and fro, weeping. Besides which there stirred not the least breath of wind, and flies and gadflies did swarm in prodigious quantity, which, settling upon her excoriate flesh, stung her so shrewdly that 'twas as if she received so many stabs with a javelin, and she was ever restlessly feeling her sores with her hands, and cursing herself, her life, her lover, and the scholar. Thus, by the exorbitant heat of the sun, by the flies and gadflies, harassed, goaded, and lacerated, tormented also by hunger, and yet more by thirst, and thereto by 1,000 distressful thoughts, she planted herself erect on her feet, and looked about her, if haply she might see or hear any one, with intent, come what might, to call to him and crave his succour. But even this hostile fortune had disallowed her. The husbandmen were all gone from the fields by reason of the heat, and indeed there had come none to work that day in the neighbourhood of the tower, for that all were employed in the threshing of their corn beside the cottages, wherefore she heard but the cicalas, while Arno, tantalizing her with the sight of his waters, increased rather than diminished her thirst. Ay, and in like manner, wherever she espied a copse, or a patch of shade, or a house, 'twas a torment to her, for the longing she had for it. What more is to be said of this hapless woman? Only this, that what with the heat of the sun above and the floor beneath her, and the scarification of her flesh in every part by the flies and gadflies, that flesh, which in the night had dispelled the gloom by its whiteness, was now become red as madder, and so bespent with clots of blood, that whoso had seen her would have deemed her the most hideous object in the world. Thus, resourceless and hopeless, she passed the long hours, expecting death rather than aught else, until half none was come and gone. When, his siesta ended, the scholar bethought him of his lady, and being minded to see how she fared, hied him back to her tower, and sent his servant away to break his fast. As soon as the lady espied him, she came, spent and crushed by her sore affliction, to the aperture, and thus addressed him: Ranieri, the cup of thy vengeance is full to overflowing, for if I gave thee a night of freezing in my courtyard, thou hast given me upon this tower a day of scorching, nay, of burning, and therewithal of perishing of hunger and thirst. Wherefore, by God, I entreat thee to come up hither, and, as my heart fails me, to take my life. Take it thou, for 'tis death I desire of all things, such and so grievous is my suffering. But if this grace thou wilt not grant, at least bring me a cup of water wherewith to lave my mouth, for which my tears do not suffice, so parched and torrid is it within. Well wist the scholar by her voice how spent she was. He also saw a part of her body burned through and through by the sun, whereby, and by reason of the lowliness of her entreaties, he felt some little pity for her. But all the same he made answer, Nay, wicked woman, 'tis not by my hands thou shalt die. Thou canst die by thine own, whenever thou art so minded, and to temper thy heat, thou shalt have just as much water from me as I had fire from thee to mitigate my cold. I only regret that, for the cure of my chill, the physicians were fain to use foul-smelling muck, whereas thy burns can be treated with fragrant rose water. And that, whereas I was like to lose my muscles and the use of my limbs, thou, for all thy excoriation by the heat, wilt yet be fair again, like a snake that has sloughed off the old skin. Alas, woe is me, replied the lady, for charms acquired at such a cost, God grant them to those that hate me. But thou, most fell of all wild beasts, how hast thou borne thus to torture me? What more had I to expect of thee or any other, had I done all thy kith and kin to death with direct torments? Verily, I know not what more cruel suffering thou couldst have inflicted on a traitor that had put a whole city to the slaughter, than this which thou hast allotted to me, to be thus roasted and devoured of the flies, and therewithal to refuse me even a cup of water, though the very murderers condemned to death by the law, as they go to execution, not seldom are allowed wine to drink, so but they ask it. Lo now, I see that thou art inexorable in thy ruthlessness, and on no wise to be moved by my suffering. Wherefore with resignation I will compose me to await death, that God may have mercy on my soul. And may this that thou dost escape not in the searching glance of his just eyes. Which said, she dragged herself, sore suffering, towards the middle of the floor, despairing of ever escaping from her fiery torment. Besides which, not once only, but 1,000 times she thought to choke for thirst. And ever she wept bitterly and bewailed her evil fate. But at length the day wore to vespers, and the scholar, being sated with his revenge, caused his servant to take her clothes and wrap them in his cloak, and hide him with the servant to the hapless lady's house, where, finding her maid sitting disconsolate and woebegone and resourceless at the door, "Good woman," quoth he, "what has befallen thy mistress?" Whereto, "Sir, I know not," replied the maid. "I looked to find her this morning abed, for methought she went to bed last night, but neither there nor anywhere else could I find her. Nor know I what is become of her. Wherefore exceeding great is my distress. But have you, sir, naught to say of the matter?" "Only this," returned the scholar, "that I would I had had thee with her there where I have had her, that I might have requited thee of thy offence, even as I have requited her of hers. But be assured that thou shalt not escape my hands, until thou hast from me such wage of thy labours, that thou shalt never flout man more. But thou shalt mind thee of me." Then, turning to his servant, he said, "Give her these clothes, and tell her that she may go bring her mistress away if she will." The servant did his bidding, and the maid, what with the message and her recognition of the clothes, was mightily afraid, lest they had slain the lady, and scarce suppressing a shriek, took the clothes, and bursting into tears, set off, as soon as the scholar was gone, at a run for the tower. Now, one of the lady's husbandmen had had the misfortune to lose 2 of his hogs that day, and seeking them, came to the tower not long after the scholar had gone thence, and peering about in all quarters, if haply he might have sight of his hogs, heard the woeful lamentation that the hapless lady made, and got him up into the tower, and called out as loud as he might, "Who wails up there?" The lady recognized her husbandman's voice, and called him by name, saying, "Prithee, go fetch my maid, and cause her come up hither to me." The husbandman, knowing her by her voice, replied, "Alas, madam, who set you there? Your maid has been seeking you all day long, but who would have supposed that you were there?" Whereupon he took the props of the ladder and set them in position, and proceeded to secure the rounds to them with withies. Thus engaged, he was found by the maid, who, as she entered the tower, beat her face and breast, and unable longer to keep silence, cried out, "Alas, sweet my lady, where are you?" Whereto the lady made answer as loud as she might, "O my sister, here above am I, weep not, but fetch my clothes forthwith." Well nigh restored to heart to hear her mistress's voice, the maid, assisted by the husbandman, ascended the ladder, which he had now all but set in order, and gaining the roof, and seeing her lady lie there naked, spent and fordone, and liker to a half-burned stump than to a human being, she planted her nails in her face, and fell a-weeping over her as if she were a corpse. However, the lady bade her for God's sake be silent, and help her to dress. And having learned from her that none knew where she had been save those that had brought her clothes, and the husbandman that was there present, was somewhat consoled, and besought her for God's sake to say naught of the matter to any. Thus long time they conversed, and the husbandman took the lady on his shoulders, for walk she could not, and bore her safely out of the tower. The unfortunate maid, following after with somewhat less caution, slipped, and falling down from the ladder to the ground, broke her thigh, and roared for pain like any lion. So the husbandman set the lady down upon a grassy mead, while he went to see what had befallen the maid, whom, finding her thigh broken, he brought and laid beside the lady, who, seeing her woes completed by this last misfortune, and that she of whom most of all she had expected succour was lamed of a thigh, was distressed beyond measure, and wept again so piteously that not only was the husbandman powerless to comfort her, but was himself fain to weep. However, as the sun was now low, that they might not be there surprised by night, he, with the disconsolate lady's appeal, hied him home, and called to his aid 2 of his brothers and his wife, who returned with him, bearing a plank, whereon they laid the maid, and so they carried her to the lady's house. There, by dint of cold water and words of cheer, they restored some heart to the lady, whom the husbandman then took upon his shoulders and bore to her chamber. The husbandman's wife fed her with sops of bread, and then undressed her and put her to bed. They also provided the means to carry her and the maid to Florence, and so 'twas done. There the lady, who was very fertile in artifices, invented an entirely fictitious story of what had happened, as well in regard of her maid as of herself, whereby she persuaded both her brothers and her sisters and every one else that 'twas all due to the enchantments of evil spirits. The physicians lost no time, and, albeit the lady's suffering and mortification were extreme, for she left more than one skin sticking to the sheets, they cured her of a high fever, and certain attendant maladies, as also the maid of her fractured thigh. The end of all which was that the lady forgot her lover, and having learned discretion, was thenceforth careful never to love nor to flout. And the scholar, learning that the maid had broken her thigh, deemed his vengeance complete, and was satisfied to say never a word more of the affair. Such then were the consequences of her flout to his foolish young woman, who deemed that she might trifle with a scholar with the like impunity as with others, not duly understanding that they, I say not all, but the most part, know where the devil keeps his tail. Wherefore, my ladies, have a care how you flout men, and more especially scholars. End of Day 8, the 7th Story.
Day 8, the 8th Story. 2 men keep with one another, the one lies with the other's wife, the other, being ware thereof, manages with the aid of his wife to have the one locked in a chest, upon which he then lies with the wife of him that is locked therein.
Grievous and distressful was it to the ladies to hear how it fared with Helena, but as they accounted the retribution in a measure righteous, they were satisfied to expend upon her but a moderate degree of compassion, albeit they censured the scholar as severe, intemperately relentless, and indeed ruthless in his vengeance. However, Pampinea having brought the story to a close, the queen bade Fiammetta follow suit, and prompt to obey, Fiammetta thus spoke:
Debonair my ladies, as methinks your feelings must have been somewhat harrowed by the severity of the resentful scholar, I deem it meet to soothe your vexed spirits with something of a more cheerful order. Wherefore I am minded to tell you a little story of a young man who bore an affront in a milder temper, and avenged himself with more moderation. Whereby you may understand that one should be satisfied if the ass and the wall are quits, nor by indulging a vindictive spirit to excess turn the requital of a wrong into an occasion of wrong-doing. You are to know then that at Siena, as I have heard tell, there dwelt two young men of good substance, and, for plebeians, of good family, the one Spinelloccio Tanena, the other Zeppa di Mino by name, who, their houses being contiguous in the Camollia, kept ever together, and, by what appeared, loved each other as brothers, or even more so, and had each a very fine woman to wife. Now it so befell that Spinelloccio, being much in Zeppa's house, as well when Zeppa was not as when he was there, grew so familiar with Zeppa's wife, that he sometimes lay with her. And on this wise they continued to foregather a great while before any one was ware of it. However, one of these days, Zeppa being at home, though his lady wist it not, Spinelloccio came in quest of him, and, the lady sending word that he was not at home, he forthwith went upstairs, and found the lady in the saloon, and seeing none else there, kissed her, as she did him. Zeppa saw all that passed, but said nothing and kept close, being minded to see how the game would end, and soon saw his wife and Spinelloccio, still in one another's arms, hie them to her chamber and lock themselves in, whereat he was mightily incensed. But, witting that to make a noise, or do aught else overt, would not lessen but rather increase his dishonour, he cast about how he might be avenged on such wise that, without the affair getting wind, he might content his soul, and having, after long pondering, hit, as he thought, upon the expedient, he budged not from his retreat until Spinelloccio had parted from the lady. Whereupon he hied him into the chamber, and there finding the lady with her headgear, which Spinelloccio in toying with her had disarranged, scarce yet readjusted, "Madam, what dost thou?" quoth he. "Whereto? Why, dost not see?" returned the lady. "Troth do I," rejoined he, "and somewhat else have I seen that I would I had not." And so he questioned her of what had passed, and she, being mightily afraid, did after long parley confess that which she might not plausibly deny, to wit, her intimacy with Spinelloccio, and fell a beseeching him with tears to pardon her. "Lo now, wife," quoth Zeppa, "thou hast done wrong, and so thou wouldst have me pardon thee, have a care to do exactly as I shall bid thee, to wit, on this wise. Thou must tell Spinelloccio to find some occasion to part from me tomorrow morning about tierce, and come hither to thee, and while he is here I will come back, and when thou hearest me coming, thou wilt get him into this chest, and lock him in there, which when thou hast done, I will tell thee what else thou hast to do, which thou mayst do without the least misgiving, for I promise thee I will do him no harm." The lady, to content him, promised to do as he bade, and she kept her word. The morning came, and Zeppa and Spinelloccio being together about tierce, Spinelloccio, having promised the lady to come to see her at that hour, said to Zeppa, "I must go breakfast with a friend, whom I had life not keep in waiting, therefore adieu." "Nay, but," quoth Zeppa, "'tis not yet breakfast time." "No matter," returned Spinelloccio, "I have business on which I must speak with him, so I must be in good time." Whereupon Spinelloccio took his leave of Zeppa, and having reached Zeppa's house by a slightly circuitous route, and finding his wife there, was taken by her into the chamber, where they had not been long together when Zeppa returned. Hearing him come, the lady, feigning no small alarm, bundled Spinelloccio into the chest, as her husband had bidden her, and having locked him in, left him there. As Zeppa came upstairs, "Wife," quoth he, "is it breakfast time?" "Ay, husband, 'tis so," replied the lady. Whereupon, "Spinelloccio is gone to breakfast with a friend to-day," quoth Zeppa, "leaving his wife at home. Get thee to the window, and call her, and bid her come and breakfast with us." The lady, whose fear for herself made her mighty obedient, did as her husband bade her, and after much pressing Spineloccio's wife came to breakfast with them, though she was given to understand that her husband would not be of the company. So, she being come, Zeppa received her most affectionately, and taking her familiarly by the hand, bade his wife, in an undertone, get her to the kitchen. He then led Spineloccio's wife into the chamber, and locked the door. Hearing the key turn in the lock, "Alas!" quoth the lady, "what means this, Zeppa? Is't for this ye have brought me here? Is this the love you bear Spineloccio? Is this your loyalty to him as your friend and comrade?" By the time she had done speaking, Zeppa, still keeping fast hold of her, was beside the chest, in which her husband was locked. Wherefore, "Madam," quoth he, "spare me thy reproaches until thou hast heard what I have to say to thee. I have loved, I yet love, Spineloccio as a brother, and yesterday, though he knew it not, I discovered that the trust I reposed in him has for its guerdon that he lies with my wife, as with thee. Now, for that I love him, I purpose not to be avenged upon him save in the sort in which he offended. He has had my wife, and I intend to have thee. So thou wilt not grant me what I crave of thee, be sure I shall not fail to take it, and having no mind to let this affront pass unavenged, will make such play with him that neither thou nor he shall ever be happy again." The lady hearkening, and by dint of his repeated asseverations coming at length to believe him, "Zeppa mine," quoth she, "as this thy vengeance is to light upon me, well content am I, so only thou let not this which we are to do embroil me with thy wife, with whom, notwithstanding the evil turn she has done me, I am minded to remain at peace." "Have no fear on that score," replied Zeppa. "Nay, I will give thee into the bargain a jewel so rare and fair that thou hast not the like." Which said, he took her in his arms and fell to kissing her, and having laid her on the chest, in which her husband was safe under lock and key, did there disport himself with her to his heart's content, as she with him. Spineloccio in the chest heard all that Zeppa had said, and how he was answered by the lady, and the Trevisan dance that afterwards went on over his head; whereat his mortification was such that for a great while he scarce hoped to live through it, and but for the fear he had of Zeppa, he would have given his wife a sound rating, close prisoner though he was. But as he bethought him that 'twas he that had given the first affront, and that Zeppa had good cause for acting as he did, and that he had dealt with him considerately and as a good fellow should, he resolved that if it were agreeable to Zeppa, they should be faster friends than ever before. However, Zeppa, having had his pleasure with the lady, got down from the chest, and being reminded by the lady of his promise of the jewel, opened the door of the chamber and brought his wife in. Quoth she with a laugh, "Madam, you have given me tit for tat," and never a word more. Whereupon, "Open the chest," quoth Zeppa, and she obeying, he showed the lady her Spineloccio lying therein. 'Twould be hard to say whether of the twain was the more shame-stricken, Spineloccio to be confronted with Zeppa, knowing that Zeppa wist what he had done, or the lady to meet her husband's eyes, knowing that he had heard what went on above his head. "Lo, here is the jewel I give thee," quoth Zeppa to her, pointing to Spineloccio, who, as he came forth of the chest, blurted out, "Zeppa, we are quits, and so 'twere best, as thou saidst a while ago to my wife, that we still be friends as we were wont, and as we had naught separate save our wives, that henceforth we have them also in common." "Content," quoth Zeppa, and so in perfect peace and accord they all four breakfasted together. And thenceforth each of the ladies had 2 husbands, and each of the husbands 2 wives, nor was there ever the least dispute or contention between them on that score. End of Day 8, the 8th Story.
Day 8, the 9th Story. Bruno and Buffalmacco prevail upon Master Simone, a physician, to betake him by night to a certain place, there to be enrolled in a company that go the course. Buffalmacco throws him into a foul ditch, and there they leave him.
When the ladies had made merry a while over the partnership in wives established by the 2 Cenies, the queen, who now, unless she were minded to infringe Dionio's privilege, alone remained to tell, began on this wise.
Fairly earned indeed, loving ladies, was the flout that Spinellocchio got from Zeppa. Wherefore my judgment jumps with that which Pampinea expressed a while ago, to wit, that he is not severely to be censured who bestows a flout on one that provokes it, or deserves it. And, as Spinellocchio deserved it, so 'tis my purpose to tell you of one that provoked it. For I deem that those from whom he received it were rather to be commended than condemned. The man that got it was a physician, who, albeit he was but a blockhead, returned from Bologna to Florence in a mantle and hood of vair. 'Tis matter of daily experience that our citizens come back to us from Bologna, this man a judge, that a physician, and the other a notary, flaunting it in ample flowing robes, and adorned with the scarlet and the vair and other array most goodly to see, and how far their doings correspond with this fair seeming is also a matter of daily experience. Amongst whom 'tis not long since Master Simone da Villa, one whose patrimony was more ample than his knowledge, came back wearing the scarlet and a broad stripe on the shoulder, and a doctor, as he called himself, and took a house in the street that we now call Via del Cocomero. Now this Master Simone, being thus, as we said, come back, had this among other singular habits, that he could never see a soul pass along the street, but he must needs ask any that was by who that man was. And he was as observant of all the doings of men, and as sedulous to store his memory with such matters, as if they were to serve him to compound the drugs that he was to give his patients. Now, of all that he saw, those that he eyed most observantly were 2 painters, of whom here to-day mention has twice been made, Bruno, to wit, and Buffalmacco, who were ever together, and were his neighbours. And as it struck him that they daffed the world aside, and lived more light-heartedly than any others that he knew, as indeed they did, he inquired of not a few folk as to their rank. And learning on all hands that they were poor men and painters, he could not conceive it possible that they should live thus contentedly in poverty, but made his mind up that, being, as he was informed, clever fellows, they must have some secret source from which they drew immense gains, for which reason he grew all agog to get on friendly terms with them, or at any rate with one of them, and did succeed in making friends with Bruno. Bruno, who had not needed to be much with him in order to discover that this physician was but a dolt, had never had such a jolly time in palming off his strange stories upon him, while the physician, on his part, was marvellously delighted with Bruno, to whom, having bidden him to breakfast, and thinking that for that reason he might talk familiarly with him, he expressed the amazement with which he regarded both him and Buffalmacco, for that, being but poor men, they lived so light-heartedly, and asked him to tell him how they managed. At which fresh proof of the doctor's simplicity and fatuity, Bruno was inclined to laugh, but, bethinking him that 'twere best to answer him according to his folly, he said, "Master, there are not many persons to whom I would disclose our manner of life, but, as you are my friend, and I know you will not let it go further, I do not mind telling you. The fact is that my comrade and I live not only as light-heartedly and jovially as you see, but much more so, and yet neither our art nor any property that we possess yields us enough to keep us in water. Not that I would have you suppose that we go a-thieving. No, 'tis that we go the course, and thereby without the least harm done to a soul we get all that we need, nay, all that we desire, and thus it is that we live so light-heartedly as you see." which explanation the doctor, believing none the less readily than he knew not what it meant, was lost in wonder, and forthwith burned with a most vehement desire to know what going the course might be, and was instant with Bruno to expound it, assuring him that he would never tell a soul. "Alas, master," said Bruno, "what is this you ask of me? 'Tis a mighty great secret you would have me impart to you. 'Twould be enough to undo me, to send me packing out of the world, nay, into the very jaws of Lucifer of San Gallo, if it came to be known. But such is the respect in which I hold your quiditative pumpkinship of Legnia, and the trust I repose in you, that I am not able to deny you aught you ask of me, and so I will tell you, on condition that you swear by the cross at Montesoni that you will keep your promise and never repeat it to a soul." The master gave the required assurance, whereupon, "You are then to know," quoth Bruno, "sweet my master, that 'tis not long since there was in this city a great master in necromancy, hight Michael Scott, for that he was of Scotland, and great indeed was the honour in which he was held by not a few gentlemen, most of whom are now dead. And when the time came that he must needs depart from Florence, he, at their instant entreaty, left behind him 2 pupils, adepts both, whom he bade hold themselves ever ready to pleasure those gentlemen who had done him honour. And very handsomely they did serve the said gentlemen in certain of their love affairs and other little matters, and finding the city and the manners of the citizens agreeable to them, they made up their minds to stay here always, and grew friendly and very intimate with some of the citizens, making no distinction between gentle and simple, rich or poor, so only they were such as were conformable to their ways. And to gratify these their friends, they formed a company of perhaps 25 men, to meet together at least twice a month in a place appointed by them, where, when they are met, each utters his desire, and forthwith that same night they accomplish it. Now, Buffalmacco and I, being extraordinarily great and close friends with these 2 adepts, were by them enrolled in this company, and are still members of it. And I assure you that as often as we are assembled together, the adornments of the saloon in which we eat are a marvel to see. Ay, and the tables laid as for kings, and the multitudes of stately and handsome servants, as well women as men, at the beck and call of every member of the company. And the basins, and the ewers, the flasks, and the cups, and all else that is there for our service in eating and drinking, of naught but gold and silver. And therewith all the abundance and variety of the viands suited to the taste of each that are set before us, each in due course, these 2 be marvels. 'Twere vain to me to seek to describe to you the sweet concord that there is of innumerable instruments of music, and the tuneful songs that salute our ears. Nor might I hope to tell you of how much wax is burned at these banquets, or compute the quantity of the comfits that are eaten, or the value of the wines that are drunk. Nor, my pumpkin of wit, would I have you suppose that, when we are there, we wear our common clothes, such as you now see me wear. Nay, there is none there so humble, but he shows as an emperor, so sumptuous are our garments, so splendid our trappings. But among all the delights of the place, none may compare with the fair ladies, who, so one do but wish, are brought thither from every part of the world. Why, you might see there my lady of the Barbonics, the queen of the Basques, the consort of the Soldan, the Empress of Osbeck, the Ciancianfera of Nornieca, the Semistanti of Berlinzone, and the Scalpedra of Narcia. But why seek to enumerate them all? They include all the queens in the world, ay, even to the Skinkymura of Prester John, who has the horns sprouting out of her nether end, so there's for you. Now, when these ladies have done with the wine and the comfits, they tread a measure or 2, each with the man at whose behest she is come, and then all go with their gallants to their chambers. And know that each of these chambers shows as a very paradise, so fair is it, ay, and no less fragrant than the cases of aromatics in your shop when you are pounding the cumin. And therein are beds that you would find more goodly than that of the Doge of Venice, and 'tis in them that we take our rest. And how busily they ply the treadle, and how lustily they tug at the frame to make the stuff close and compact, I leave you to imagine. However, among the luckiest of all I reckon Buffalmacco and myself, for that Buffalmacco for the most part fetches him the Queen of France, and I do the like with the Queen of England, who are just the finest women in the world, and we have known how to carry it with them, so that we are the very eyes of their heads. So, I leave it to your own judgment to determine whether we have not good cause to live and bear ourselves with a lighter heart than others, seeing that we are beloved of two such great queens, to say nothing of the 1,000 or 2,000 florins that we have of them whenever we are so minded. Now, all this in the vulgar we call going the course, because, as the Corsairs prey upon all the world, so do we, albeit with this difference, that whereas they never restore their spoil, we do so as soon as we have done with it. So now, my worthy master, you understand what we mean by going the course, but how close it behoves you to keep such a secret you may see for yourself, so I spare you any further exhortations. The master, whose skill did not reach perhaps beyond the treatment of children for the scurf, took all that Bruno said for gospel, and burned with so vehement a desire to be admitted into this company, that he could not have longed for the summum bonum itself with more ardour. So, after telling Bruno that indeed 'twas no wonder they bore them light-heartedly, he could scarce refrain from asking him there and then to have him enrolled, albeit he deemed it more prudent to defer his suit, until by lavishing honour upon him he had gained a right to urge it with more confidence. He therefore made more and more of him, had him to breakfast and sup with him, and treated him with extraordinary respect. In short, such and so constant was their intercourse that it seemed as though the master wist not how to live without Bruno. And as it went so well with him, Bruno, to mark his sense of the honour done him by the doctor, painted in his saloon a picture symbolical of Lent, and an Agnus Dei at the entrance of his chamber, and an alembic over his front door, that those who would fain consult him might know him from other physicians, besides a battle of rats and mice in his little gallery, which the doctor thought an extremely fine piece. And from time to time, when he had not supped with the master, he would say to him, "Last night I was with the company, and, being a little tired of the Queen of England, I fetched me the Gumedra of the great can of Teresi." "Gumedra?" quoth the master. "What is she? I know not the meaning of these words." "Thereat, master," replied Bruno, "I marvel not, for I have heard tell that neither Porcograsso nor Vanacenna say aught thereof." "Thou wouldst say Ippocrasso and Avicenna," returned the master. "I'faith, I know not," quoth Bruno. "I as ill know the meaning of your words as you of mine, but Gumedra, in the speech of the great Can, signifies the same as Empress in ours. Ah, a fine woman you would find her, and plenty of her. I warrant she would make you forget your drugs and prescriptions and plasters." And so Bruno, from time to time whetting the master's appetite, and the master at length thinking that by his honourable entreatment of him he had fairly made a conquest of Bruno, it befell that one evening, while he held the light for Bruno, who was at work on the battle of rats and mice, he determined to discover to him his desire, and as they were alone, thus he spoke. "God knows, Bruno, that there lives not the man for whom I would do as much as for thee. Why, if thou wast to bid me go all the way from here to Peretola, I almost think I would do so. Wherefore, I trust thou wilt not deem it strange if I talk to thee as an intimate friend and in confidence. Thou knowest 'tis not long since thou didst enlarge with me on thy gay company and their doings, which has engendered in me such a desire as never was to know more thereof. Nor without reason, as thou wilt discover, should I ever become a member of the said company, for I straightway give thee leave to make game of me, should I not then fetch me the fairest maid thou hast seen this many a day, whom I saw last year at Cacavincilli, and to whom I am entirely devoted, and by the body of Christ I offered her 10 Bolognese groats that she should pleasure me, and she would not. Wherefore I do most earnestly entreat thee to instruct me what I must do to fit myself for membership in the company, and never doubt that in me you will have a true and loyal comrade, and one that will do you honour. And above all, thou seest how goodly I am of my person, and how well furnished with legs, and of face as fresh as a rose, and therewithal I am a doctor of medicine, and I scarce think you have any such among you, and not a little excellent lore I have, and many a good song by heart, of which I will sing thee one. And forthwith he fell a-singing. Bruno had such a mind to laugh that he could scarce contain himself, but still he kept a grave countenance, and when the master had ended his song and said, "How likes it thee?" he answered, "Verily no lyre of straw could vie with you, so artegutically you refine your strain." "I warrant thee," returned the master, "thou hadst never believed it hadst thou not heard me." "Ay, indeed, sooth say'st thou," quoth Bruno. "And I have other songs to boot," said the master, "but enough of this at present. Thou must know that I, such as thou seest me, am a gentleman's son, albeit my father lived in the Contado, and on my mother's side I come of the Velecchio family, and as thou mayst have observed, I have quite the finest library and wardrobe of all the physicians in Florence. God's faith, I have a robe that cost, all told, close upon £100 in bagatines more than 10 years ago. Wherefore I make most instant suit to thee that thou get me enrolled, which if thou do, God's faith, be thou never so ill, thou shalt pay me not a stiver for my attendance of thee." Whereupon Bruno, repeating to himself, as he had done many a time before, that the doctor was a very numbskull, "Master," quoth he, "show a little more light here, and have patience until I have put the finishing touches to the tails of these rats, and then I will answer you." So he finished the tails, and then, putting on an air as if he were not a little embarrassed by the request, "Master mine," quoth he, "I should have great things to expect from you, that I know, but yet what you ask of me, albeit to your great mind it seems but a little thing, is a weighty matter indeed for me, nor know I a soul in the world to whom, though well able, I would grant such a request, save to you alone. And this I say not for friendship's sake alone, albeit I love you as I ought, but that your discourse is so fraught with wisdom that 'tis enough to make a beguine start out of her boots, much more then to incline me to change my purpose. And the more I have of your company, the wiser I repute you. Whereto I may add that, if for no other cause, I should still be well disposed towards you for the love I see you bear to that fair piece of flesh of which you spoke but now. But this I must tell you, 'tis not in my power to do as you would have me in this matter. But though I cannot myself do the needful in your behalf, if you will pledge your faith, whole and solid as may be, to keep my secret, I will show you how to go about it for yourself, and I make no doubt that, having this fine library and all the other matters you spoke of a while ago, you will compass your end." Quoth then the master, "Nay, but speak freely. I see thou dost yet scarce know me, and how well I can keep a secret. There were few things that Messer Gasparolo da Saliceto did, when he was podestar of Forlimpopoli, that he did not confide to me, so safe he knew they would be in my keeping. And wouldst thou be satisfied that I say sooth, I assure you that I was the first man whom he told that he was about to marry Bergamina, so there's for thee." "Well and good," said Bruno, "if such as he confided in you, well indeed may I do the like. Know then that you will have to proceed on this wise. Our company is governed by a captain and a council of 2, who are changed every 6 months, and on the calends without fail Buffalmacco will be captain, and I counsellor. 'Tis so fixed. And the captain has not a little power to promote the admission and enrolment of whomsoever he will. Wherefore, methinks, you would do well to make friends with Buffalmacco, and honourably entreat him. He is one that, marking your great wisdom, will take a mighty liking to you forthwith, and when you have just a little dazzled him with your wisdom and these fine things of yours, you may make your request to him, and he will not know how to say no. I have already talked with him of you, and he is as well disposed to you as may be, and having so done, you will leave the rest to me." Whereupon, "Thy words are to me for an exceeding great joy," quoth the master, And if he be one that loves to converse with sages, he has but to exchange a word or two with me, and I will answer for it that he will be ever coming to see me. For so fraught with wisdom am I, that I could furnish a whole city therewith, and still remain a great sage." Having thus set matters in train, Bruno related the whole affair, point by point, to Buffalmacco, to whom it seemed 1,000 years till he should be able to give Master Noodle that of which he was in quest. The doctor, now all agog to go the course, lost no time and found no difficulty in making friends with Buffalmacco, and fell to entertaining him, and Bruno likewise, at breakfast and supper in most magnificent style, while they fooled him to the top of his bent, for, being gentlemen that appreciated excellent wines and fat capons, besides other good cheer in plenty, they were inclined to be very neighbourly, and needed no second bidding, but, always letting him understand that there was none other whose company they relished so much, kept ever with him. However, in due time the master asked of Buffalmacco that which he had before asked of Bruno. Whereat Buffalmacco feigned to be not a little agitated, and turning angrily to Bruno, made a great pother about his ears, saying, "By the most high God of Passignano, I vow I can scarce forbear to give thee that over the head that should make thy nose fall about thy heels. Traitor that thou art, for 'tis thou alone that canst have discovered these secrets to the master." Whereupon the master interposed with no little vigour, averring with oaths that 'twas from another source that he had gotten his knowledge, and Buffalmacco at length allowed himself to be pacified by the sage's words. So, turning to him, "Master," quoth he, "'tis evident indeed that you have been at Bologna, and have come back hither with a mouth that blabs not, and that 'twas on no pippin, as many a dolt does, but on the good long pumpkin that you learned your ABC, and, if I mistake not, you were baptized on a Sunday, and though Bruno has told me that 'twas medicine you studied there, 'tis my opinion that you there studied the art of catching men, of which, what with your wisdom and your startling revelations, you are the greatest master that ever I knew." He would have said more, but the doctor, turning to Bruno, broke in with, "Ah, what it is to consort and converse with the wise! Who but this worthy man would thus have read my mind through and through? Less quick by far to rate me at my true worth wast thou. But what said I when thou toldst me that Buffalmacco delighted to converse with sages? Confess now, have I not kept my word?" "Verily," quoth Bruno, "you have more than kept it." Then, addressing Buffalmacco, "Ah," cried the master, "what hadst thou said, hadst thou seen me at Bologna, where there was none, great or small, doctor or scholar, but was devoted to me? So well wist I how to entertain them with my words of wisdom. Nay, more, let me tell thee that there was never a word I spoke but set every one a-laughing, so great was the pleasure it gave them. And at my departure they all deplored it most bitterly, and would have had me remain, and by way of inducement went so far as to propose that I should be sole lecturer to all the students in medicine that were there, which offer I declined, for that I was minded to return hither, having vast estates here, that have ever belonged to my family, which accordingly I did." Quoth then Bruno to Buffalmacco, "How shows it now, man? Thou didst not believe me when I told thee what he was. By the Gospels, there is never a physician in this city that has the law of ass's urine by heart as he has. Verily, thou wouldst not find his like between here and the gates of Paris. Now, see if thou canst help doing as he would have thee." "'Tis even as Bruno says," observed the doctor, "but I am not understood here. You Florentines are somewhat slow of wit. Would you could see me in my proper element among a company of doctors." Whereupon, "Of a truth, master," quoth Buffalmacco, "your law far exceeds any I should ever have imputed to you, wherefore, addressing you as 'tis meet to address a man of your wisdom, I give you disjointedly to understand that without fail I will procure your enrolment in our company." After this promise, the honours lavished by the doctor upon the two men grew and multiplied, in return for which they diverted themselves by setting him a-prancing upon every wildest chimera in the world, and promised, among other matters, to give him by way of mistress the Countess of Civillari, whom they averred to be the goodliest creature to be found in all the Netherlands of the human race, and the doctor asking who this countess might be. "Mature, my gherkin," quoth Buffalmacco, "she is indeed a very great lady, and few houses are there in the world in which she has not some jurisdiction. Nay, the very friars minors, to say naught of other folk, pay her tribute to the sound of the kettle drum. And I may tell you that, when she goes abroad, she makes her presence very sensibly felt, albeit for the most part she keeps herself close. However, 'tis no great while since she passed by your door one night, on her way to the Arno to bathe her feet and get a breath of air, but most of her time she abides at Laterina. Sergeants has she not a few that go their rounds at short intervals, bearing one and all the rod and the bucket in token of her sovereignty. And barons aplenty in all parts, as Tamanino de la Porta, Don Metta, Manico di Scopa, Squacera, and others, with whom I doubt not you are intimately acquainted, though you may not just now bear them in mind. Such, then, is the great lady, in whose soft arms we, if we delude not ourselves, will certainly place you, in which case you may well dispense with her of Cacavincigli." The doctor, who had been born and bred at Bologna, and understood not their words, found the lady quite to his mind, and shortly afterwards the painters brought him tidings of his election into the company. Then came the day of the nocturnal gathering, and the doctor had the two men to breakfast, and when they had breakfasted, he asked them after what manner he was to join the company. Whereupon, "Lo now, master," quoth Buffalmacco, "you have need of a stout heart. Otherwise you may meet with some let to our most grievous hurt, and for what cause you have need of this stout heart, you shall hear. You must contrive to be to-night, about the hour of first sleep, on one of the raised tombs that have been lately placed outside of Santa Maria Novella, and mind that you wear one of your best gowns, so that your first appearance may impress the company with a proper sense of your dignity, and also because, as we are informed, for we were not present at the time, the Countess, by reason that you are a gentleman, is minded to make you a Knight of the Bath at her own charges. So you will wait there until one whom we shall send come for you, who, that you may know exactly what you have to expect, will be a beast, black and horned, of no great size, and he will go snorting and bounding amain about the piazza in front of you, with intent to terrify you. But when he perceives that you are not afraid, he will draw nigh you quietly, and when he is close by you, then get you down from the tomb, fearing nothing, and minding you neither of God nor of the saints, mount him. And when you are well set on his back, then fold your arms upon your breast, as in submission, and touch him no more. Then, going gently, he will bear you to us. But once mind you of God or the saints, or give way to fear, and I warn you, he might give you a fall, or dash you against something that you would find scarce pleasant. Wherefore, if your heart misgives you, you were best not to come, for you would assuredly do yourself a mischief, and us no good at all. Quoth then the doctor, "You know me not as yet. 'Tis perchance because I wear the gloves and the long robe that you misdoubt me. Ah, did you but know what feats I have done in times past at Bologna, when I used to go after the women with my comrades, you would be lost in amazement. God's faith! On one of those nights there was one of them, a poor sickly creature she was too, and stood not a cubit in height, who would not come with us. So first I treated her to many a good cuff, and then I took her up by main force, and carried her well nigh as far as a crossbow will send a bolt, and so caused her willy-nilly come with us. And on another occasion I mind me that, having none other with me but my servant, a little after the hour of Ave Maria, I passed by the cemetery of the Friars Minors, and though that very day a woman had been there interred, I had no fear at all. So on this score you may make your minds easy, for indeed I am a man of exceeding great courage and prowess, and to appear before you with due dignity, I will don my scarlet gown in which I took my doctor's degree, and it remains to be seen if the company will not give me a hearty welcome and make me captain out of hand. Let me once be there, and you will see how things will go. Else, how is it that this countess that has not yet seen me is already so enamoured of me that she is minded to make me a Knight of the Bath? And whether I shall find knighthood agreeable, or know how to support the dignity well or ill, leave that to me. Whereupon, well said, excellent well said, quoth Buffalmacco. But look to it you disappoint us not, either by not coming or by not being found when we send for you. And this I say because 'tis cold weather, and you medical gentlemen take great care of your health. God forbid, replied the doctor. I am none of your chilly folk. I fear not the cold. 'Tis seldom, indeed, when I leave my bed o' nights, to answer the call of nature, as one must at times, that I do more than throw a pelisse over my doublet, so rest assured that I shall be there. So they parted, and towards nightfall the master found a pretext for leaving his wife, and privily got out his fine gown, which in due time he donned, and so hied him to the tombs, and having perched himself on one of them, huddled himself together, for 'twas mighty cold, to await the coming of the beast. Meanwhile, Buffalmacco, who was a tall man and strong, provided himself with one of those dominoes that were wont to be worn in certain revels which are now gone out of fashion, and, enveloped in a black pelisse turned inside out, showed like a bear, save that the domino had the face of a devil, and was furnished with horns. In which guise, Bruno following close behind to see the sport, he hied him to the piazza of Santa Maria Novella, and no sooner wist he that the master was on the tomb, than he fell a-careering in a most wild and furious manner to and fro the piazza, and snorting and bellowing and gibbering like one demented, insomuch as that as soon as the master was ware of him, each several hair on his head stood on end, and he fell a-trembling in every limb, being in sooth more timid than a woman, and wished himself safe at home. But, as there he was, he strove might and main to keep his spirits up, so overmastering was his desire to see the marvels of which Bruno and Buffalmacco had told him. However, after a while Buffalmacco allowed his fury to abate, and came quietly up to the tomb on which the master was, and stood still. The master, still all of a tremble with fear, could not at first make up his mind whether to get on the beast's back or no, but at length, doubting it might be the worse for him if he did not mount the beast, he overcame the one dread by the aid of the other, got down from the tomb, saying under his breath, God help me, and seated himself very comfortably on the beast's back, and then, still quaking in every limb, he folded his arms as he had been bidden. Buffalmacco now started, going on all fours at a very slow pace, in the direction of Santa Maria della Scala, and so brought the master within a short distance of the convent of the Ladies of Ripoli. Now, in that quarter there were divers trenches, into which the husbandmen of those parts were wont to discharge the Countess of Civillari, that she might afterwards serve them to manure their land. Of one of which trenches, as he came by, Buffalmacco skirted the edge, and, seizing his opportunity, raised a hand and caught the doctor by one of his feet, and threw him off his back and head foremost right into the trench, and then, making a terrific noise and frantic gestures as before, went bounding off by Santa Maria della Scala towards the field of Ognissanti, where he found Bruno, who had betaken him thither that he might laugh at his ease, and there the two men in high glee took their stand to observe from a distance how the bemired doctor would behave. Finding himself in so loathsome a place, the master struggled might and main to raise himself and get out, and though again and again he slipped back, and swallowed some drams of the ordure, yet, bemired from head to foot, woebegone and crestfallen, he did at last get out, leaving his hood behind him. Then, removing as much of the filth as he might with his hands, knowing not what else to do, he got him home, where, by dint of much knocking, he at last gained admittance. And scarce was the door closed behind the malodorous master, when Bruno and Buffalmacco were at it, all agog to hear after what manner he would be received by his wife. They were rewarded by hearing her give him the soundest rating that ever bad husband got. "Ah," quoth she, "fine doings these! Thou hast been with some other woman, and wast minded to make a brave show in thy scarlet gown. So I was not enough for thee? Not enough for thee, forsooth, I that might content a crowd! Would they had choked thee with the filth in which they have soused thee! 'Twas thy fit resting place. Now to think that a physician of repute and a married man should go by night after strange women!" Thus, and with much more to the like effect, while the doctor was busy washing himself, she ceased not to torment him until midnight. On the morrow, Bruno and Buffalmacco, having painted their bodies all over with livid patches, to give them the appearance of having been thrashed, came to the doctor's house, and finding that he was already risen, went in, being saluted on all hands by a foul smell, for time had not yet served thoroughly to cleanse the house. The doctor, being informed that they were come to see him, advanced to meet them, and bade them good morning, whereto Bruno and Buffalmacco, having prepared their answer, replied, "No good morning shall you have from us. Rather we pray God to give you bad years enough to make an end of you, seeing that there lives no more arrant and faithless traitor. 'Tis no fault of yours if we, that did our best to honour and pleasure you, have not come by a dog's death. Your faithlessness has cost us to-night as many sound blows as would more than suffice to keep an ass trotting all the way from here to Rome. Besides which we have been in peril of expulsion from the company in which we arranged for your enrolment. If you doubt our words, look but at our bodies, what a state they're in." And so, baring their breasts, they gave him a glimpse of the patches they had painted there, and forthwith covered them up again. The doctor would have made them his excuses, and recounted his misfortunes, and how he had been thrown into the trench. But Buffalmacco broke in with, "Would he had thrown you from the bridge into the Arno? Why must you needs mind you of God and the saints? Did we not forewarn you?" "God's faith," returned the doctor, "that I did not." "How?" quoth Buffalmacco. "You did not? You do so above a little, for he that we sent for you told us that you trembled like an aspen, and knew not where you were. You have played us a sorry trick, but never another shall do so, and as for you, we will give you such requital thereof as you deserve." The doctor now began to crave their pardon, and to implore them for God's sake not to expose him to shame, and used all the eloquence at his command to make his peace with them. And if he had honourably entreated them before, he thenceforth, for fear they should publish his disgrace, did so much more abundantly, and courted them both by entertaining them at his table and in other ways. And so you have heard how wisdom is imparted to those that get it not at Bologna. End of Day 8, the 9th Story.
Day 8. The 10th Story. A Sicilian woman cunningly conveys from a merchant that which he has brought to Palermo. He, making a show of being come back thither with a far greater store of goods than before, borrows money of her, and leaves her in lieu thereof water and tow.
How much in diverse passages the Queen's story moved the ladies to laughter, it boots not to ask. None was there in whose eyes the tears stood not full a dozen times for excess of merriment. However, it being ended, and Dioneo witting that it was now his turn, thus spake he:
"Gracious ladies, 'tis patent to all that wiles are diverting in the degree of the wiliness of him that is by them beguiled. Wherefore, albeit stories most goodly have been told by you all, I purpose to relate one which should afford you more pleasure than any that has been told, seeing that she that was beguiled was far more cunning in beguiling others than any of the beguiled of whom you have spoken. There was, and perhaps still is, a custom in all maritime countries that have ports, that all merchants arriving there with merchandise should, on discharging, bring all their goods into a warehouse, called in many places a dogana, and maintained by the state or the lord of the land, where those that are assigned to that office allot to each merchant, on receipt of an invoice of all his goods and the value thereof, a room in which he stores his goods under lock and key. Whereupon the said officers of the dogana enter all the merchant's goods to his credit in the book of the dogana, and afterwards make him pay duty thereon, or on such part as he withdraws from the warehouse. By which book of the dogana the brokers not seldom find out the sorts and quantities of the merchandise that is there, and also who are the owners thereof, with whom, as occasion serves, they afterwards treat of exchanges, barters, sales, and other modes of disposing of the goods. which custom obtained, as in many other places, so also at Palermo in Sicily, where in like manner there were and are not a few women, fair as fair can be, but foes to virtue, who, by whoso knows them not, would be reputed great and most virtuous ladies. And being given not merely to fleece, but utterly to flay men, they no sooner espy a foreign merchant in the city, than they find out from the book of the Dogana how much he has there, and what he is good for, and then, by caressing and amorous looks and gestures and words of honeyed sweetness, they strive to entice and allure the merchant to their love, and not seldom have they succeeded, and wrested from him great part or the whole of his merchandise, and of some they have gotten goods and ship and flesh and bones, so delightsomely have they known how to ply the shears. Now 'tis not long since one of our young Florentines, Niccolo da Signano by name, albeit he was called Salibaito, arrived there, being sent by his masters with all the woollen stuffs that he had not been able to dispose of at Salerno fair, which might perhaps be worth 500 florins of gold. And having given the invoice to the officers of the Dogana, and stored the goods, Salibaito was in no hurry to get them out of bond, but took a stroll or two about the city for his diversion. And as he was fresh complexioned and fair, and not a little debonair, it so befell that one of these ladies that plied the shears, and called herself Jancofiore, began to ogle him, whereof he, taking note, and deeming that she was a great lady, supposed that she was taken by his good looks, and cast about how he might manage this amour with all due discretion. Wherefore, saying naught to a soul, he began to pass to and fro before her house, which she observing, occupied herself for a few days in inflaming his passion, and then, affecting to be dying of love for him, sent privily to him a woman that she had in her service, and who was an adept in the arts of the procuress. She, after not a little palaver, told him, while the tears all but stood in her eyes, that for his handsome person and winsome air, her mistress was so enamoured of him that she found no peace by day or by night, and therefore, if 'twere agreeable to him, there was naught she desired so much as to meet him privily at a bagnio. Whereupon she drew a ring from her purse, and gave it him by way of token from her mistress. Overjoyed as ne'er another to hear such good news, Salibaito took the ring, and after drawing it across his eyes and kissing it, put it on his finger, and told the good woman that, if Madonna Jancofiore loved him, she was well requited, for that he loved her more dearly than himself, and that he was ready to meet her wherever and whenever she might see fit. With which answer the procuress hied her back to her mistress, and shortly afterwards Salibaito was informed that he was to meet the lady at a certain bagnio at vespers of the ensuing day. So, saying naught to a soul of the matter, he hied him punctually at the appointed hour to the bagnio, and found that it had been taken by the lady. Nor had he long to wait before two female slaves made their appearance, bearing on their heads, the one a great and goodly mattress of wadding, and the other a huge and well-filled basket, and having laid the mattress on a bedstead in one of the rooms of the bagnio, they covered it with a pair of sheets of the finest fabric, bordered with silk, and a quilt of the whitest Cyprus buckram, with two daintily embroidered pillows. The slaves then undressed and got into the bath, which they thoroughly washed and scrubbed, whither soon afterwards the lady, attended by two other female slaves, came, and made haste to greet Salibaito with the heartiest of cheer, and when, after heaving many a mighty sigh, she had embraced and kissed him, "I know not," quoth she, "who but thou could have brought me to this, such a fire hast thou kindled in my soul, little dog of a Tuscan." Whereupon she was pleased that they should undress, and get into the bath, and two of the slaves with them, which accordingly they did, and she herself, suffering none other to lay a hand upon him, did with wondrous care wash Salibaito from head to foot with soap perfumed with musk and cloves, after which she let the slaves wash and shampoo herself. The slaves then brought two spotless sheets of finest texture, which emitted such a scent of roses that 'twere as if there was naught there but roses, in one of which, having wrapped Salavito, and in the other the lady, they bore them both to bed, where, the sheets in which they were enfolded being withdrawn by the slaves as soon as they had done sweating, they remained stark naked in the others. The slaves then took from the basket cruets of silver most goodly, and full, this of rosewater, that of water of orange blossom, a third of water of jasmine blossom, and a fourth of namphor water, wherewith they sprinkled them. After which, boxes of comfits and the finest wines being brought forth, they regaled them a while. To Salavito 'twas as if he were in paradise. 1,000 times he scanned the lady, who was indeed most beautiful, and he counted each hour as 100 years, until the slaves should get them gone, and he find himself in the lady's arms. At length, by the lady's command, the slaves departed, leaving a lighted torch in the room, and then the lady and Salavito embraced, and to Salavito's prodigious delight, for it seemed to him that she was all but dissolved for love of him, tarried there a good while. However, the time came when the lady must needs rise, so she called the slaves, with whose help they dressed, regaled themselves again for a while with wine and comfits, and washed their faces and hands with the odoriferous waters. Then, as they were going, quoth the lady to Salavito, "If it be agreeable to thee, I should deem it a very great favour if thou wouldst come to-night to sup and sleep with me." Salavito, who, captivated by her beauty and her studied graciousness, never doubted but that he was as dear to her as her very heart, made answer, "Madam, there is naught you can desire but is in the last degree agreeable to me, wherefore to-night and ever 'tis my purpose to do whatsoever you may be pleased to command." So home the lady hied her, and having caused a brave show to be made in her chamber, with her dresses and other paraphernalia, and a grand supper to be prepared, awaited Salavito, who, being come there as soon as 'twas dark, had of her a gladsome welcome, and was regaled with an excellent and well-served supper, after which they repaired to the chamber, where he was saluted by a wondrous sweet odour of aloe wood, and observed that the bed was profusely furnished with birds after the fashion of Cyprus, and that not a few fine dresses were hanging on the pegs, which circumstances did one and all beget in him the belief that this must be a great and wealthy lady, and though he had heard a hint or two to the contrary touching her life, he would by no means credit them, nor, supposing that she had perchance taken another with guile, would he believe that the same thing might befall him. So, to his exceeding great solace, he lay with her that night, and ever grew more afire for her. On the morrow, as she was investing him with a fair and dainty girdle of silver, with a goodly purse attached, "Sweet my Salavito," quoth she, "prithee forget me not. Even as my person, so is all that I have at thy pleasure, and all that I can at thy command." Salavito then embraced and kissed her, and so bade her adieu, and betook him to the place where the merchants were wont to congregate. And so it befell that he, continuing to consort with her from time to time, and being never a denier the poorer thereby, disposed of his merchandise for ready money, and at no small profit, whereof, not by him, but by another, the lady was forthwith advised. And Salavito, being come to see her one evening, she greeted him gaily and gamesomely, and fell a kissing and hugging him, and made as if she was so afire for love of him that she was like to die thereof in his arms, and offered to give him 2 most goodly silver cups that she had, which Salavito would not accept, having already had from her, taking one time with another, full 30 florins of gold, while he had not been able to induce her to touch so much of a groat of his money. But when by this show of passion and generosity she had thoroughly kindled his flame, in came, as she had arranged, one of her slaves, and spoke to her, whereupon out of the room she went, and after a while came back in tears, and threw herself prone on the bed, and set up the most dolorous lamentation that ever woman made. Whereat Salavito, wondering, took her in his arms, and mingled his tears with hers, and said, "Alas, heart of my body, what ails thee thus of a sudden? Wherefore art thou so distressed? Ah, tell me the reason, my soul." The lady allowed him to run on in this strain for a good while, and then, "Alas, sweet my lord," quoth she, "I know not either what to do or what to say. I have but now received a letter from Messina, in which my brother bids me sell, if need be, all that I have here, and send him without fail within 8 days 1,000 florins of gold, otherwise he will forfeit his head. I know not how to come by them so soon. Had I but 15 days, I would make shift to raise them in a quarter where I might raise a much larger sum, or I would sell one of our estates. But as this may not be, would I had been dead, or ere this bad news had reached me." Which said, affecting to be utterly broken hearted, she ceased not to weep. Salavito, the ardour of whose passion had in great measure deprived him of the sagacity which the circumstances demanded, supposed that the tears were genuine enough, and the words even more so. Wherefore, "Madam," quoth he, "I could not furnish you with 1,000, but if 500 florins of gold would suffice, they are at your service. If you think you could repay them within 15 days, and you may deem yourself in luck's way, for 'twas only yesterday that I sold my woollens, which had I not done I could not have lent you a groat." "Alas!" returned the lady, "then thou hast been in straits for money. Oh, why didst thou not apply to me? Though I have not 1,000 at my command, I could have given thee quite 100, nay, indeed 200 florins. By what thou hast said, thou hast made me hesitate to accept the service that thou proposest to render me." Which words fairly delivered Salavito into the lady's hands, insomuch that, "Madam," quoth he, "I would not have you decline my help for such a scruple, for had my need been as great as yours, I should certainly have applied to you." Quoth then the lady, "Ah, Salavito mine, well I wot the love that thou bearest me is a true and perfect love, seeing that without waiting to be asked thou dost so handsomely come to my aid with so large a sum of money. And albeit I was thine without this token of thy love, yet assuredly it has made me thine in an even greater degree, nor shall I ever forget that 'tis to thee I owe my brother's life. But God knows I take thy money from thee reluctantly, seeing that thou art a merchant, and 'tis by means of money that merchants conduct all their affairs. But as necessity constrains me, and I have good hope of speedily repaying thee, I will even take it, and by way of security, if I should find no readier method, I will pawn all that I have here." Which said, she burst into tears, and fell upon Salavito, pressing her cheek upon his. Salavito tried to comfort her, and having spent the night with her, on the morrow, being minded to show himself her most devoted servant, brought her, without awaiting any reminder, 500 fine florins of gold, which she, laughing at heart, while the tears streamed from her eyes, took, Salavito trusting her mere promise of repayment. Now that the lady had gotten the money, the complexion of affairs began to alter. And whereas Salavito had been wont to have free access to her whenever he was so minded, now, for one reason or another, he was denied admittance 6 times out of 7, nor did she greet him with the same smile, or shower on him the same caresses, or do him the same cheer as of yore. So a month, 2 months passed, beyond the time when he was to have been repaid his money, and when he demanded it, he was put off with words. Whereby Salavito, being now ware of the cheat which his slender wit had suffered the ill-disposed woman to put upon him, and also that, having neither writing nor witness against her, he was entirely at her mercy in regard of his claim, and being moreover ashamed to lodge any complaint with any one, as well because he had been forewarned of her character as because he dreaded the ridicule to which his folly justly exposed him, was chagrined beyond measure, and inly bewailed his simplicity. And his masters having written to him, bidding him change the money and remit it to them, he, being apprehensive that, making default as he must, he should, if he remained there, be detected, resolved to depart. And having taken ship, he repaired, not as he should have done, to Pisa, but to Naples, where at that time resided our gossip Pietro del Cagnano, treasurer of the Empress of Constantinople, a man of great sagacity and acuteness, and a very great friend of Salavito and his kinsfolk, to whom, trusting in his great discretion, Salavito after a while discovered his distress, telling him what he had done, and the sorry plight in which by consequence he stood, and craving his aid and counsel, that he might the more readily find means of livelihood there, for that he was minded never to go back to Florence. Impatient to hear of such folly, "'Twas ill done of thee," quoth Caliano. "Thou hast misbehaved thyself, wronged thy masters, and squandered an exorbitant sum in lewdness. However, 'tis done, and we must consider of the remedy." And indeed, like the shrewd man that he was, he had already bethought him what was best to be done, and forthwith he imparted it to Salavito, which expedient Salavito approving, resolved to make the adventure, and having still a little money, and being furnished with a loan by Caniano, he provided himself with not a few bales, well and closely corded, and bought some 20 oil casks, which he filled, and having put all on shipboard, returned to Palermo. There he gave the invoice of the bales, as also of the oil casks, to the officers of the Regano, and having them all entered to his credit, laid them up in the storerooms, saying that he purposed to leave them there until the arrival of other merchandise that he expected. Which Jancofiore learning, and being informed that the merchandise that he had brought with him was worth fully 2,000 florins of gold, or even more, besides that which he expected, which was valued at more than 3,000 florins of gold, bethought her that she had not aimed high enough, and that 'twere well to refund him the 500, if so she might make the greater part of the 5,000 florins her own. Wherefore she sent for him, and Salavito, having learned his lesson of cunning, waited upon her. Feigning to know naught of the cargo he had brought with him, she received him with marvellous cheer, and began, "Lo now, if thou wast angry with me because I did not repay thee thy money in due time." But Salavito interrupted her, saying with a laugh, "Madam, 'tis true I was a little vexed, seeing that I would have plucked out my heart to pleasure you. But listen, and you shall learn the quality of my displeasure. Such and so great is the love I bear you, that I have sold the best part of all that I possess, whereby I have already in this port merchandise to the value of more than 2,000 florins, and expect from the Levant other goods to the value of above 3,000 florins, and mean to set up a warehouse in this city, and live here, to be ever near you, for that I deem myself more blessed in your love than any other that lives." Whereupon, "Hark ye, Salavito," quoth the lady, "whatever advantages thee is mighty grateful to me, seeing that I love thee more than my very life, and right glad I am that thou art come back with intent to stay, for I hope to have many a good time with thee. But something I must say to thee by way of excuse, for that whilst thou wast thinking of taking thy departure, there were times when thou wast disappointed of seeing me, and others when thou hadst not as gladsome a welcome as thou wast wont to have. And therewithal I kept not the time promised for the repayment of thy money. Thou must know that I was then in exceeding great trouble and tribulation, and whoso is thus bested, love he another never so much, cannot greet him with as gladsome a mien, or be as attentive to him as he had life. And thou must further know that 'tis by no means an easy matter for a lady to come by 1,000 florins of gold. Why, 'tis every day a fresh lie, and never a promise kept, and so we in our turn must needs lie to others. And 'twas for this cause, and not for any fault of mine, that I did not repay thee thy money. However, I had it but a little while after thy departure, and had I known whither to send it, be sure I would have remitted it to thee. But as that I wist not, I have kept it safe for thee." She then produced a purse, in which were the very same coins that he had brought her, and placed it in his hand, saying, "Count, and see if there are 500 there." 'Twas the happiest moment Salavito had yet known, as, having told them out, and found the sum exact, he made answer, "Madam, I know that you say sooth, and what you have done abundantly proves it. Wherefore, and for the love I bear you, I warrant you there is no sum you might ask of me on any occasion of need, with which, if 'twere in my power, I would not accommodate you. Whereof, when I am settled here, You will be able to assure yourself." Having thus in words reinstated himself as her lover, he proceeded to treat her as his mistress, whereto she responded, doing all that was in her power to pleasure and honour him, and feigning to be in the last degree enamoured of him. But Salavito, being minded to requite her guile with his own, went to her one evening, being bidden to sup and sleep with her, with an aspect so melancholy and dolorous that he showed as he had lief given up the ghost. Jancofiore, as she embraced and kissed him, demanded of him the occasion of his melancholy, whereto he, having let her be instant with him a good while, made answer, "I am undone, for that ship, having aboard her the goods that I expected, has been taken by the corsairs of Monaco, and held to ransom in 10,000 florins of gold, of which it falls to me to pay 1,000, and I have not a denier, for the 500 thou repaidst to me I sent forthwith to Naples to buy stuffs for this market. And were I to sell the merchandise I have here, as 'tis not now the right time to sell, I should scarce get half the value, nor am I as yet so well known here as to come by any to help me at this juncture, and so what to do or what to say I know not. But this I know, that if I send not the money without delay, my merchandise will be taken to Monaco, and I shall never touch aught of it again." Whereat the lady was mightily annoyed, being apprehensive of losing all, and bethought her how she might prevent the goods going to Monaco. Wherefore, "God knows," quoth she, "that for the love I bear thee I am not a little sorry for thee, but what boots it idly to distress oneself? Had I the money, God knows I would lend it thee forthwith, but I have it not. One indeed there is that accommodated me a day or two ago with 500 florins that I stood in need of, but he requires a heavy usance, not less than 30 on the 100, and if thou shouldst have recourse to him, good security must be forthcoming. Now, for my part, I am ready, so I may serve thee, to pledge all these dresses, and my person to boot, for as much as he will lend thee thereon. But how wilt thou secure the balance?" Salavito divined the motive that prompted her thus to accommodate him, and that she was to lend the money herself, which, suiting his purpose well, he first of all thanked her, and then said that, being constrained by necessity, he would not stand out against exorbitant terms, adding that as to the balance, he would secure it upon the merchandise that he had at the Dogana, by causing it to be entered into the name of the lender, but that he must keep the key of the storerooms, as well that he might be able to show the goods, if requested, as to make sure that none of them should be tampered with, or changed, or exchanged. The lady said that this was reasonable, and that 'twas excellent security. So betimes on the morrow the lady sent for a broker in whom she reposed much trust, and having talked the matter over with him, gave him 1,000 florins of gold, which the broker took to Salavito, and thereupon had all that Salavito had at the Dogana entered in his name. They then had the script and counterscript made out, and the arrangement, thus concluded, went about their respective affairs. Salavito lost no time in getting aboard a bark with his 500 florins of gold, and being come to Naples, sent thence a remittance, which fully discharged his obligation to his masters that had entrusted him with the stuffs. He also paid all that he owed to Pietro del Cagnano, and all his other creditors, and made not a little merry with Cagnano over the trick that he had played on the Sicilian lady. He then departed from Naples, and being minded to have done with mercantile affairs, betook him to Ferrara. Jancofiore, surprised at first by Salavito's disappearance from Palermo, waxed after a while suspicious, and when she had waited fully 2 months, seeing that he did not return, she caused the broker to break open the storerooms, and trying first of all the casks, she found them full of sea water, save that in each there was perhaps a hogshead of oil floating on the surface. Then, undoing the bales, she found them all, save 2 that contained stuffs, full of tow, and in short their whole contents put together were not worth more than 200 florins. Wherefore Jancofiore, knowing herself to have been outdone, regretted long and bitterly the 500 florins of gold that she had refunded, and still more the 1,000 that she had lent, repeating many a time to herself, "Who with a Tuscan has to do, has need of eyesight quick and true." Thus, left with the loss and the laugh against her, she discovered that there were others as knowing as she. End of Day 8, the 10th Story.
Day the 8th. The Conclusion. No sooner was Dioneo's story ended than Lauretta, witting that therewith the end of her sovereignty was come, bestowed her meed of praise on Pietro Canigiano for his good counsel, and also on Solobaetto for the equal sagacity which he displayed in carrying it out, and then, taking off the laurel wreath, set it on the head of Emilia, saying graciously, I know not, madame, how debonair a queen you may prove, but at least we shall have in you a fair one. Be it your care, then, that you exercise your authority in a manner answerable to your charms. Which said, she resumed her seat. Not so much to receive the crown as to be thus commended to her face, and before the company, for that which ladies are wont to covet the most. Emilia was a little shamefast. A tint like that of the newly blown rose overspread her face, and the while she stood silent with downcast eyes. Then, as the blush faded away, she raised them, and having given her seneschal her commands touching all matters pertaining to the company, thus she spake: Sweet my ladies, 'tis matter of common experience, that when the oxen have swunken a part of the day under a coercive yoke, they are relieved thereof and loosed, and suffered to go seek their pasture at their own sweet will in the woods. Nor can we fail to observe that gardens luxuriant with diversity of leafage are not less, but far more fair to see than woods wherein is naught but oaks. Therefore I deem that, as for so many days our discourse has been confined within the bounds of certain laws, it will be not only meet but profitable for us, being in need of relaxation, to roam a while, and so recruit our strength to undergo the yoke once more. And therefore I am minded that tomorrow the sweet tenor of your discourse be not confined to any particular theme, but that you be at liberty to discourse on such wise as to each may seem best. For well assured am I, that thus to speak of diverse matters will be no less pleasurable than to limit ourselves to one topic, and by reason of this enlargement my successor in the sovereignty will find you more vigorous, and be therefore all the more forward to reimpose upon you the wonted restraint of our laws. Having so said, she dismissed all the company until supper time. All approved the wisdom of what the queen had said, and being risen betook them to their several diversions, the ladies to weave garlands and otherwise disport them, the young men to play and sing, and so they whiled away the hours until supper time, which being come, they gathered about the fair fountain, and took their meal with gay and festal cheer. Supper ended, they addressed them to their wonted pastime of song and dance, at the close of which the queen, notwithstanding the songs which divers of the company had already gladly accorded them, called for another from Pamphilo, who without the least demur thus sang:
So great, O love, the bliss through thee I prove, so jocund my estate, that in thy flame to burn I bless my fate. Such plenitude of joy my heart doth know, of that high joy and rare, wherewith thou hast me blessed, as, bounds disdaining, still doth overflow, and by my radiant air my blitheness manifest. For by thee, thus possessed with love, where meeter 'twere to venerate, I still consume within thy flame elate. Well wot I, love, no song may e'er reveal, nor any sign declare, what in my heart is pent. Nay, might they so, that were I best conceal, whereof were others ware, 'twould serve but to torment me, whose is such content, that weak were words, and all inadequate, a tittle of my bliss to adumbrate. Who would have dreamed that ere in mine embrace her I should clip and fold, whom there I still do feel, or as 'gainst her face e'er to lay my face, attain such grace untold, and unimagined weal. Wherefore my bliss I seal of mine own heart within the circuit strait, and still in thy sweet flame luxuriate.
So ended Pamphilo his song, whereto all the company responded in full chorus, nor was there any but gave to its words an inordinate degree of attention, endeavouring by conjecture to penetrate that which he intimated that it was meet he should keep secret. Diverse were the interpretations hazarded, but all were wide of the mark. At length, however, the Queen, seeing that ladies and men alike were fain of rest, bade all betake them to bed. End of Conclusion of the 8th Day.